last time, too.
Watch the videotape.
Good evening. This is the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting, January 8th, 2013. Do we have a roll call?
Mary Jane Brady.
Present.
Terry Carney.
Present.
Al Pfeifhouse. Present. Eric Wagner. Leanne Charlot.
Present.
Mark Berry.
Present.
Susan Ryder.
Present.
Great. Thank you. Our first order of business is communications and questions from visitors. It would appear we have none. And our next order of business is a presentation by Kate Amaral and Nate on our community wellness update.
Tubes warming up.
Good evening. I think that projector is going to get going in just a second. It was working before you came in, I promise. Here it comes. There we go. Slowly but surely. There we go. All right. Kate and I are here to talk a little bit about the Community Wellness Task Force and give you an update on what's been happening with that. The task force was created in 2011 in response to the tragic suicides that have profoundly impacted our community. Kate and I both represent District 65, and you can also see from this list there's a good number of other community groups and organizations represented by that task force. As I mentioned, the group was established in 2011, and in March 2012 we had our first whole group meeting. It was determined at that meeting that our first matter of business would be to conduct a community-wide assessment. The goal was to investigate the sort of mental health resources that are available within the Lake Bluff and Lake Forest community, as well as the Knollwood community, for our youth. It was also determined at that point that we needed to bring in some outside experts and some consultants to take a look at our resources and to help us plan our direction. On June 7th, 2012, we convened a group of over 70 community participants. That meeting was facilitated by Dr. Darcy Hutchins from Johns Hopkins University, and we also had Dr. Mark Reineke there. He is a consultant working with the organization, but is also an expert in the field of depression and suicide. He was presenting to that group, and on is it June 7th as well, we actually conducted the assessment. Dr. Reineke also presented to that group and talked a lot about prevention and best practices in the area of suicide prevention. Following that June 7th meeting, Dr. Reineke met with the group again and made some recommendations, synthesized all the information that he learned from his time with the group, and made three really strong recommendations for our next steps. The first type of recommendation was prevention on three levels, I guess is what I meant to say. There's the primary prevention, which is the general population and what we would present to them as far as preventative education about suicide and depression. Then the secondary was more for a select group of students or people that would be identified as high risk, and then the tertiary, which would be for those who are in immediate need of help. Dr. Reineke helped us then break down, oh, pardon me, I jumped ahead of you. Dr. Reineke helped us to then take a look at all the organizations and identify what those individual groups might be able to contribute. And so we've been working from our end as educators, as community organizations, as hospitals, to implement some strategies that we think would be beneficial to helping prevent this sort of thing from happening again. And Kate is going to kind of go through some of the different strategies that have been implemented in the different organizations.
So starting with Lake Forest High School, they took several approaches that focused both on the students and the staff. One, as you can see, is that they held a one-day training for all psychologists, health teachers, and social workers. They were trained by Dr. Karen Schwartz of Johns Hopkins University on the Adolescent Depression and Awareness Program. All staff also will complete a signs and symptoms of depression training. They also are doing another ADAP training May 8th with teachers and a parent night before. As you can see, too, there's a number of things that they took a student focus with, and they have a student-led group called Enjoy the Journey. And one thing that they petitioned for was a homework-free Thanksgiving break, which a lot of teachers and our whole district embraced. Also, I just want to make note that May 5th is Depression Awareness Week, and they're planning a whole week of activities around that, which you'll hear about later. I don't know how to advance the slide. Okay. At Croya, they have a peer training program that they have revised. There are 6 new classes currently being taught by Croya and LFHS staff. These are held during lunch. The pilot program included 60 to 70 students, and it's looking to expand. They also increased the training for their adult chaperones who participate in the student retreats, and this includes risk assessment for depression and suicide. They've had this partnership with the Child, Adolescent, and Family Development Center ongoing, but relatively new, is this family service opportunity. They actually had it before, but it's been brought back with 2 new grants from 2 family foundations. And this will provide 5 hours per week youth and family counseling at Croya for no charge to these families. And there's a flyer, I don't know if you did receive it in your packets, and it's also at the door. And Todd and Higgins as a community has really embraced this new partnership. Just a little bit about Family Services. It's an 82-year-old social service group that services Lake County and Northern Cook County. It's provided therapy in Lake Forest for over 60 years. No one's turned away. LEAD has taken a number of approaches as well. They've created a panic link on their website that directs those that call to a local resource. They had also partnered with Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital to hold a middle school youth summit in September. That was the first middle school focused youth summit. Of course, they did their red ribbon race. They established a clinical advisory committee with 15 local clinicians. Right now they're working on a text hotline, and they have a parent resource guide on the LEAD website. Of course, as you know, the Lake Bluff PTO as well as the Lake Forest PTO embraced the theme of community for their school activities this year. The APT in Lake Forest has had the task force come and present the updates to them, and they're coming back in February and March. The feedback from them is that parents are pleased with the direction that the task force is taking. And as you know, you're familiar with what's going on at the Lake Bluff PTO, but we've also focused on programs and activities to build community, and we're looking to bring in a motivational speaker or an anti-bullying speaker in conjunction with the Alliance for Excellence. And then I included down there, this is something you guys did, which I thought was great, was to invite the community residents to attend our fine arts programs. And next is Nate.
So within the middle schools, there's a number of opportunities for partnering. Obviously, we have representatives on the task force from Lake Bluff Middle School. There's representatives from Deer Path as well as Country Day. And as it turns out, those representatives are also very active with the Charm Foundation. So through that emotional wellness initiative, there's also more partnering going on. And we're trying to mirror each other as best we can. And if we come across great programming and things that we want to make sure the other schools are aware of, we certainly share those among ourselves. Some of the things that are being done, there's a stress and depression unit that's being delivered as part of our wellness programming and health classes. And so that's something that all grades 6, 7, and 8 receive. We did have students participate, as we mentioned earlier, in the 2012 Middle School Youth Summit, and that was a very successful program, and we had, I think, about 15 to 20 students who participated in that. You may have heard of Erica's Lighthouse. Also in our health and wellness class, there's a similar program called Claire's Story. It's sort of a spin-off of Erica's Lighthouse, and that's part of, well, as part of it, some of the high school students will come back and present and talk about stress and pressures and and a little bit of depression, and share some of their experiences as they moved on into high school. One of the things that we rolled out with the new website is an anonymous online reporting tool. This is something that we talked about with each of our kids during advisory. We showed them how to access it, and it provides them with a way in which to report things that are concerning to them. It could be a friend who perhaps has made a comment that scared them or made them feel as if they might do something to harm themselves. It could be that they were a bystander to a bullying issue and they wanted to report it without being known that it was them that brought it to our attention. And we have students who are using that tool. Some are choosing to tell us who they are, some are choosing not to, but it's certainly a nice way for us to provide students, parents for that matter, with a way to share information with the school and allow us the opportunity to investigate. So that's something that's new and been put in play as part of our new website. We also joined with the high school and with Deer Path just prior to Thanksgiving. Really wanted to emphasize the importance of family and the importance of relaxing and having some downtime. And as part of that, we did not assign any homework over the Thanksgiving break, and I think teachers and students alike appreciated that. And that was just one of those small things that came out of the...
Parents really appreciated that.
Well, good.
Really.
I think maybe a tradition forming here. So that was something that we got a lot of positive feedback on. That was part of the Enjoy the Journey group. That's a group at the high school. That was an idea that they presented to the administration at the high school. They liked it. They shared it with us, and it became a much bigger event. That is me. Sorry, I'm trying to get out of here too quickly. Also, the Lake Bluff and Lake Forest Police Department has worked very closely with the Wellness Task Force. They created a crisis communication hub to notify community leaders of any crisis that might impact the community, giving us a jump start on responding and working on an appropriate reaction to those kinds of things. Lake County Community Suicide Task Force worked on incorporating, pardon me, oh, yeah, so the Lake County Community Suicide Task Force is sharing resources with us, and obviously Lake Forest College has been very much involved and has been participating in sharing their mental health providers, meeting with us and sharing their information as well. So just a little bit more there. And Kate has the next.
So the Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital has been a big partner and supporter, particularly by providing the support of Dr. Reineke, our consultant. They also took to mobilizing their pediatricians associated with their hospital to do a quick depression screening of all adolescents at their annual physical. And most clinicians have adopted this practice, and many more are considering implementing it. Already ongoing is depression screening for patients in the ER for adult patients, and they're looking at the logistics for screening 12 to 18-year-olds as well. They are also actively seeking partnerships to provide mental health services in our community. And most recently, Dr. Reineke has applied for a grant with 2 other collaborators from different universities. They applied for a grant with the American Association of Suicidology, which I didn't realize was a word, but apparently it is. And it's a really cool computer-based intervention. It's called cognitive bias modification therapy, which is it's a very simple tool, but a very fancy name. And they're looking for 50 teens to recruit from the Lake Forest area to help participate in this study. On January 16th, he's conducting a mental training with the key mental health professionals from Lake Forest High School, as well as the private high schools and the middle schools. This is from noon to 3 on the 16th. And then he's looking to create a coping with depression group. Our representative from the Lake Forest College is looking for 2 interns at the college to potentially be co-leaders for this group. The training is 15 weeks long, 2 hours a week, and then it would be a depression group for students. It would meet after school, but not be done through the school. And just to finalize, we have put together a subcommittee that will meet actually tomorrow to start working on a letter writing campaign to help raise some funds for the task force, so I'm sure you'll receive a letter soon. And then at our last meeting, we discussed what is the future of the task force, and everyone agreed that they felt that this was important enough work to continue, particularly to refresh and coordinate all of our resources. One of the things that came out of the assessment in June was that our community is actually very rich in resources, and we don't need to add anything. We really just needed to increase our communication and fine-tune those resources. So we think it's important to keep having a group that oversees that, keeps those resources coordinated and up to date. So they're looking, the task force would meet maybe every 3 to 4 months. Particularly, right now we're overseen by Julie Cooley, who is retiring next year. And her model that she would like to see enacted would be that the chairperson is actually somebody from each of these community entities that rotates maybe every year or two. So they're looking at what that model would be, but we hope that'll be something that will still help shepherd our community through these sort of difficult waters. And our next meeting is March 15th. That's it. And a big thank you to Julie Cooley also for helping us with this presentation.
Thank you both.
Any questions at all? Thank you both for representing us on the committee. Kate, I have a quick question. If I'm a middle school parent, and by the way, the flyer, we have a flyer that went out, Constant Contact today. If I'm a middle school parent, do you feel that there's enough resources for parents that they're going to know where to go for these things? For instance, one of you mentioned a depression guide for parents or something. Is that something we should be putting on our website?
I think, and that's something that as a task force we struggled with, should we have our own website? And we decided that each of these entities should disseminate the information to their constituents. And I think it would be good to have a hot button on the district website that led to, maybe just the LEAD website is actually a great resource for parents, but I honestly don't know how many parents go there. I was embarrassed as a middle school parent to hear that we had the anonymous online reporting tool, because I didn't know about that either. So I think we again have the resources. I don't know whether parents are aware of them.
See, that's my concern. And as you know, when these circumstances come up, parents need that information immediately. Mm-hmm. And so that might be something that we want to, maybe you and I can talk about, where we can add that on our website so it's convenient and parents can access it, at least to get to the links.
Yes, I think it would be a good idea to have a panic button right on the home page. And I think the other districts have done that, because I think you're right. When you're in a crisis moment and you don't know where to turn to, you need it to be very obvious.
Do you know which district might have put this panic button on? Because I can look at it then online.
I think the high school has, and I think maybe the middle school has. I don't know for sure, but I think the high school has.
Is this presentation something also that we could put on our website for the community to see?
Yes.
I think a lot of community members would also be interested in seeing what all has gone on. Mm-hmm. And there's been an incredible amount of work by an incredible number of people, so.
And it's one reason why we wanted to come present it. We haven't shared this information at the PTO meetings and wherever we can, but again, I don't think we're reaching a wide enough audience. So I think that'd be a good idea to put it on the website.
Well, and it's great to see every one of these organizations working together and sharing their information and making a clearinghouse for people. And like you said, having a panic button where when you're in that moment and you don't know where to go, you've got a place where it's all together, and you've got options for what to do from there. So, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I think we're going to move on to discussion of per pupil expenditures and comparisons.
I'm going to start and then turn it over and have Jane kind of walk you through some items. This has been, as you know, talked about for many meetings, is what exactly makes up per pupil expenditures in school districts? How do we compare? I think you're going to find, you may not find all the answers you're looking for, because many of the items are how school districts report out that information also. I do want to share for all of you that there is definitely not any scientific method used in the selection of districts What we did is Jane and I sat down and said, we want all the North Shore districts. Obviously, we want Lake Forest as our neighbor. And there were a couple small districts our size, high achieving, in my old location. So those districts were Gower and Butler. Butler is actually, I think, one of the highest achieving school districts in the state. And then we put in a couple other districts based upon discussions this year at board meetings. One of the things that I'd like to see come out of strategic planning is, as a board, where would you like to see our district? As I had shared with you before, I'd like to aim out of state soon, but I think we have to also have benchmarks within the state to start. And these were just some of the high achieving districts that we chose that are close to here. So there's no scientific method, but it's nice to have benchmark districts that you can use for comparison. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane, and I'm sure that you'll have some questions for her.
I want to point out that we are only looking at elementary districts, so we're not comparing ourselves to a high school district, because that's an entirely different animal altogether, or unit districts, which you don't have very many of up here. I tried to make this print as small as I could.
Great job of that.
Way to go.
You succeeded.
Congratulations.
There's a lot of information on here, and I didn't know how else to do it. There were some columns we could have eliminated, but being the numbers person, I just kind of found it very interesting. To begin with, the data that's on this sheet comes from two sources, and that is the most recent district report card for each of the districts, as well as their 2010-11 annual financial reports, which you can access from the State Board of Education's website. So I downloaded all that information for each of these districts and then compiled this spreadsheet of various points of data, operating expense per pupil being one little column, but everything else you see with the ratios of students to staff, enrollment, so you can kind of see where Lake Bluff 65 is comparatively. Class sizes, I just picked kindergarten, 4th, and 8th as kind of a progression. We didn't need to see all 9 grade levels. And then the other expenditures on across the sheet. I have identified for you the highest in each column, the lowest in each column, the average, and the median in each column. So then you can kind of see where 65 is compared to the other 12 districts in here.
So we don't have a lot of color in our row.
We're neither high nor low,
No.
nor average.
Now, I want to point out, for Lake Bluff 65, our school report card, and I can't remember what our report card says, but for our ratio of pupil to administrators, the report card indicates a much higher number of pupils to administrators.
300 something, right?
300 something. However, that's because, number one, my position is not reported as an administrative position on our report card, because I'm not reported on the teacher service record. So that's a little misleading. And I actually included all of our administrators, including myself, if we had a part-time administrator. So our ratio is actually 181 students per administrator. So we're not the high number that the report card indicates. We're in better position.
Would that
Doesn't
say,
that show, and that shows one idiosyncrasy out of one particular category for one
Yes.
district?
Now,
When you compile that all the way around, that's the truth with all of these districts and all the years.
absolutely. And there are other situations where they may have an interim superintendent, or they may have similar situations. I don't know that, so we can only go by their actual report card numbers. Now, also, on our operating expense per pupil, I've got the 16,161 number, which is on the amended annual financial report for that year, which was filed with the state board. However, on our report card, they used the original AFR that had been filed. So it's neither here nor there. However, next year's report card is going to be accurate, and you will see there won't be much change from this number 16,000 to the next one. However, if we stayed with the original AFR, it would look like our operating expense per pupil will go down for the following year. Pretty good. That's not accurate. So we're being accurate here based on audited numbers. Just to address the operating expense per pupil, because that is a figure that has been brought out. It's one of many statistics on the school report card. And it is worth looking at and using as a comparison. However, my opinion is that it's not apples to apples with any district of the 800 districts in the state of Illinois. It just isn't. There are too many variables, and I just gave you one little example with the administrators' numbers reported, as well as salaries, because my salary is not included in our administrator salaries on the Illinois school report card. So every district has its nuances, its differences. It just is. It's a number you can look at, but it's not a number that you can use to compare one district to another. You just can't do it. The formula for that number comes from the annual financial report as prepared by auditors for every school district, and it includes basically all of your expenses. Then they subtract out a whole list of things. And what affects us is they deduct summer school costs, they deduct debt payments, they deduct special education tuition. There's a whole host of others. It's a page this long, but those are basically the ones that affect us. So every district's going to be different. I'm not saying ignore that number, but certainly understand that there are many, many variables in that number, and it's also affected by enrollment. It's affected by salary schedules. I can tell you that the operating expense per pupil is going to be much lower in Carmi, Illinois, if anybody knows where that is, or Carlinville, Illinois, or whatever. But that's not because we provide much better education. They provide a very good education, but they're not going to have the salary schedule that we have. Their cost of living isn't the same as it is up here. It's just a different. It's different economics. That's part of the variable that goes into the OEPP.
So Jane, what I hear you saying is that any one of these numbers might be off. We haven't gone through and made sure this is an apples to apples comparison in each one of these numbers.
It is data as reported on their AFR or their report card. What goes into those numbers, we don't know.
And what we do know is that in one case, ours we know was wrong. In a couple of cases, data for us was incorrect, so it's reasonable to assume that that's going on elsewhere.
There was one inaccuracy, but also leaving Jane's salary off. That's not an inaccuracy. It's because Jane's not on the teacher service record. Mm-hmm. So just like we don't have her salary in that, we also don't have her counted as an administrator. So that is just one example of the many that can happen. Districts sometimes that have shared services, you can purchase service, you report it differently than when you're actually employing someone.
I'm going to address that. For our neighbors who share many personnel and many central office administration, they have the ability to account for the salaries and benefits of their central office administration between the districts however they see fit and however their auditors see fit. But let's just assume, for example's sake, they have an administrator and they account for that administrator 50% to each district. That's fine. One district may pay 100% of that salary, so they bill the other district for 50% of that. The other district pays for that 50% as a purchase service, not as a salary. So that's not a reported salary in their AFR. Mm-hmm. District number one, who receives the check from district number two, applies that not as a revenue, but as an entry against their expenses. for that salary line item. There's nothing wrong with that by any stretch of imagination. I wouldn't, it's just different accounting because of their situation of two districts sharing personnel.
So if you,
And there, that could happen in other districts that share personnel, I don't know.
So the
I can tell
district-
you that some of these, I'm sorry, Al, I can tell you that some of these districts, a couple of them I know of, purchase service from another district for business office services. I don't know how that accounting is done, whether they pay that person as a salary or if they actually buy that purchase. I know that's involved a couple of the districts that's in here. I'm sorry.
So the district that was on your right hand doesn't report that as a salary because it's
Not in their
purchased.
accounting, because they're buying the service
So
from.
that impacts the chart.
They're buying it as a service from
So the
district number
that was on
one.
your left hand
Uh-huh.
that receives the 50% of the salary and applies it as an expense against their salaries, does that also reduce the district on your left hand's
Yeah,
reporting for salaries?
correct, that's correct.
So the net is that roughly 50% of that person's salary gets reported between the two districts and the other 50% does not.
It's reported just in a different way.
Yes.
Not counted in the calculation.
But it's not counted as a salary
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
reimbursed.
yes, correct. So, and that's only looking at the salary portion. I mean, you,
Right. Right.
you've got to add in what they pay as a purchase service and
But
things
that
like that.
situation-
Totals.
Really plays with the numbers. Like you say, there's nothing wrong, but it means that we can't compare.
It's just that, it's
There's no
just,
way to compare
it doesn't
apples to
allow
apples
us,
when that happens.
it doesn't allow us to use the AFR,
Right.
to use
Okay.
that as an apples to apples.
So then,
And I don't want to bog down on that one
No,
thing. I just
but
want to
that could,
explain,
that kind of thing could impact
and it could impact other districts we don't
all
know.
kinds of numbers here.
is it safe to say that, just as a cautionary, the farther you drill down, the more likely you're going to run into comparisons that are not easily made? And the more you pull back and look at it from a macro level and aggregate numbers and you get ranges of things, that's probably a safer, more appropriate way to analyze that kind of data.
Absolutely, and that's why, we have 13 districts here, because if we only looked at 4 or 5, I don't think we have a good picture. Maybe, we want to look at 20, that's fine, we can do whatever we want to do. But 13 is a sizable number. It's virtually every North Shore Elementary District here, which is who we historically have benchmarked against. We've looked at negotiations and salaries and benefits. We've looked at administrator salaries. We looked at test scores. We've used them during my tenure here for almost everything. What's happening here? What's happening here? So that's why we use those. But that's also, it's good to look at a lot of these numbers and look at the averages and see where we are. But just to look at a district and this district and compare them, you just,
Look
It's
for
hard.
outliers, that's another thing.
Look for
you
outliers,
look for, a
absolutely.
sample in here, and to see if we're an outlier, and as you notice on there, because we don't have any color in our row, we're not an outlier. And again, as I have shared with all of you, my big thing is if you're gonna compare compare districts with financials, you need to be comparing with test scores too. And all I did was get on the IIRC, which you have the little board members book on how to do that. It's a public site, easy to get on. And you will notice in Jane's very careful consideration on her work versus what's on the IIRC, our number for administrators is much higher. She knows what the background is on that, so she could correct it on our sheet here. So, I looked for outliers when I looked at test scores. I look for hey, this district's really high in fourth grade language arts. We need to have somebody checking in with that particular district. Many of the districts are very, very similar to ours with the fact that they might only have 2 schools. So I think it's important that you look at the overall summary, but it's really hard to compare. This is not an apples and apples comparison.
I like what you said earlier when we started this conversation too, about it would be interesting to hear community feedback in strategic planning process as to what they think our benchmarks should be, because I would imagine.
very interesting,
I
yeah.
would imagine that would be a very different set of schools because we're kind of strictly talking about finances here. But in the community, what is the perception of who we're really competing against, if that's the right word? Where do people consider living when they consider schools? And the Winnetkas and the Wilmettes are extremely different in different financial situations because of their numbers than us, but maybe they're in the parents' or the community's competitive set when they look at where could their kids be going, so.
But another thing with benchmarks and comparisons is you don't have one set of comparisons for financials and one set of comparisons for test scores. You really need to have the same kind of comparisons, so you're looking at the big picture. Okay, this district, well, they might pay a little bit more, but look at their test scores, and then you really have to say, is it statistically significant, the difference in the test scores? So it's really a much bigger picture.
A lot of
And
things to consider.
Jane's very excited. She's a number cruncher. She really liked this, and then I said, well, if we look at this, we really need to make that data available for test scores too.
Means that in a good way.
But even in test score data.
Somebody's gotta be
there's
that way.
stories behind different grade levels and different things that happen there. There's always the what happened in fifth grade. Well, that was the year 3 people took maternity leaves, and we only have 3 teachers.
You have a very small school enrollment.
Exactly.
One outlier screws it up versus somebody with a much larger enrollment, so.
And there's those individual stories for almost each category for each district.
Gene, since while you're on this, the presentation that we just heard and the musical presentation that we received at our last meeting are also reminders that test scores and finances still don't tell the whole picture.
No, they don't, do they?
And we know that our district has had a very strong emphasis in fine arts, which may not impact hugely, but I think it probably does impact this more so than some comparative districts. We have some full-time staff persons in fine arts that are not duplicated in every district. And some of us would fight very strongly not to give that up. We think it's very important. So the numbers, even with test scores, still don't tell the whole story.
Because we want to look at the whole child, which is something I hear from all of you all the time. We just don't have the metrics to
Well,
measure
that's the
that other
problem.
piece
How do
yet.
you measure fine arts? How do you measure the wellness program?
We'll figure it out, though.
Jane, can you find some numbers to throw?
I mean, there probably are some studies that we could put our hands on that will show that having a strong fine arts program or having wellness programming and staff are going to contribute to mental health.
It's worth doing, but
For
it's still
kids
soft
and-
data. It's not going to go down as numbers.
Well,
And
but
we
it's-
have to accept that. I mean,
Soft number or not, I think it's one that people would
There are real
back us
data.
up on.
are there real data?
I
heard a
think we could
radio
get
show just the
follow-up
other day.
data from Lake Forest, too. After our kids
fine arts and
graduate,
music.
what happens?
And academic success. There are, I think.
I think they're probably, I mean, I haven't, I haven't gone out looking at the studies, but I don't think it would take us very long to find some pretty good evidence to support it. Apart from just the common sense and looking around, seeing what
Yeah,
it does
I
for
disagree.
kids.
I just don't know that we could ever get it into a comparative chart like that, but it's certainly worth reporting.
And we may need to be the trendsetters in that.
Well, the other nuance is the investment we make in technology, that very few schools make a similar investment, so, that's gotta be, that's a real dollars and cents investment, that you can measure, but I think personally, I feel good about it, because at the end of the day, I think whoever said it earlier was right on, is that it's all about, are you an outlier? And from this data, it says we're not an outlier, in any category per se, so I think that's a real positive, it's not, doesn't mean that we can't be more fiscally, responsible or whatever the case may be, but it certainly doesn't tell me that we have a big problem, because if we were an outlier, then in one way or the other, you'd have to ask yourself what's going on. And now maybe we have to drill down and find out there's some nuances, but that's where if you're not an outlier, it says, okay, you shouldn't have to worry about this. This shouldn't be your big focus. You could argue all about, apples and oranges and all that kind of stuff, but the reality is everything's a little bit of apples and oranges, and as long as you're within the pack and you believe the pack is a reasonable representative sample of people you want to be compared against, what's wrong with it? I mean, I wouldn't spend a whole lot more time on the data, because what you really should do is, once you establish that you're not an outlier, is that you just track your individual trend, because that's going to be calculated consistently year in, year out, and you just have to ask yourself, are you happy with that way the trend's going relative to whatever economic dynamics are going on, or environmental dynamics? And say CPI is going up 3% and our cost per student is going up 10%, you might ask yourself, why is that, kind of thing. But once you get sort of that big picture, macro picture that you, in this microcosm of 13 schools looks okay, then, or districts, then you come back and say, okay, let's just track us over time and see how if that makes sense, if we're happy with that, and we understand if expenses are going up, if per person, if that's what we're focused on, why, and are we comfortable with that? But, to get really hung up on, where you are as long as you're not an outlier, I think you're fine.
And I mean, I think that's an excellent point, and I really appreciate you saying that, because I feel like we spent a tremendous amount of time looking at these issues, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. I very much believe we need to be, very cautious and very responsible about the way we use our resources. At the same time, it puts aside some other conversations that we're not having. And, I know and trust that you and staff are still moving forward on some really great curriculum stuff and, working on moving our programs forward. But I do like the idea that, okay, we do a thorough assessment of it, but we also need to contain that so that it's not the only conversation we're having. And I hope, I don't know what the intention is with these documents. I know we've been pretty good about posting things. I would strongly recommend and hope, and I'm sure you are planning this, but that we put some of this disclaimer right there on the face of the document and point people to listen to this discussion on video if they're going to be looking at this data, because I think there are a lot of opportunities to look at it and either misunderstand or misinterpret or think that something's been done to manipulate it. I mean, there's a world of figures out there, and we all know you can take figures from anywhere, so take it at face value and work with it from there.
We actually have taken board book and set it up so that most documents are available to the public before the meeting, but if they're not, they're available after the meeting, except for those confidential documents that are never made public. So it's an automatic thing that we've got handled now to make sure that everything gets posted.
But with these, I think it's really important to also have that disclaimer saying, it may not be comparing apples to oranges, and there's some examples where you've got, the interim superintendent, for example, or, different ways of accounting for certain kinds of expenses that can make a pretty, especially in a small school district, make a pretty big difference in the way that the percentages play out.
Jane, you and I can work on something.
I think I'd add to what Leanne said, I'd say, why we're using this AFR data relative to just a gross division of expenses by pupil or whatever, because there's a lot of differences there too, and that's what people have done in the past. And if nothing else, even though we've already discussed some inconsistencies, it is a consistent reporting process that is across the state with these AFRs. So at least you're using, consistently calculated data. Now you can argue, well, I take the gross expenditures by students, I get a different number. Well, that's fine, but you might get a different number from every other school if you had their data and could do it. But this is the only place you have the same data, purportedly the same data, across many schools where you can at least make a comparison. So, like you said, Leanne, you can do anything with data if you choose to. And by the end of the day, at least you have something consistent here, that I believe. And then again, if you're not an outlier, what do you?
I agree with Terry and the consideration of an outlier as a big picture way to look at it. I would like to see us continue to make that same kind of analysis every year, though, to revisit it just to make sure. But I'd also like to see some kind of structured approach to not saying, okay, we're not an outlier, so we're fine, but to improving our efficiency in terms of operating expense per pupil or instructional expenses per pupil. I'm not sure the format that takes, but I don't think because we're not an outlier, we should say we're done.
I actually think that that's all going to be handled through the strategic plan, because without question, I'm sure the feedback we're getting from everybody is make sure that you're efficient and effective and provide the best possible instruction. And as ECRA works with us on those indicators, there'll be an indicator that we will need to report out on at least once a year, if not more. So I think that's going to be taken care of.
One of the things that came to mind as I'm going through all this, because it's a pretty good competitive set of schools, and I would imagine most of these other schools are having conversations about being more efficient. I wonder if there's opportunities to put our heads together with other districts, not to share services, but to share stories and learning and efficiency and, whenever you have
It's already started.
Okay.
Superintendents are starting that. I think Jane goes to her business official meetings and is able, she can pick up the phone and say, hey, what are you doing for this particular thing? It's nice to be able to divide it up because from my sake, I need to look at the overall. Jane can answer any financial question very quickly. And between the two of us, we can usually get some good ideas. You guys talk at your meetings, we talk at ours.
I chair the North Shore Elementary School District's IASBO region, and we meet regularly. And many of the business managers of these districts are my friends, and we discuss things. But every district has different priorities.
Sure.
And their constituents have different expectations, and, we talk and discuss, but District A's big fund balance isn't an issue in their community. It has become an issue in ours, and it may in their future. They can draw some experience from Lake Bluff on how to handle that, but it is amazing to me the differences from district to district in the small little region of what their citizens' expectations and
Build on what Mark said,
tolerances are.
and what you just said, Jane, I think, the most logical thing would be, why wouldn't you have a group purchasing organization? You get your purchases together across these various districts and leverage, what you have, the critical mass there. But I assume you'd run into everybody has a preference on what they want to do.
Absolutely.
You couldn't everybody agree on the same desk or the same chair, which is unfortunate,
That
but
would never happen.
I know, but so a lot of these things that you typically see in business, where people would come together with common needs and wants and so forth, then they can aggregate their purchasing power. It's a lot of uniqueness out there.
Terry, remember the one place where it is happening, insurance co-ops, the state's talking about doing
Getting
away
rid of
with
it,
that.
yeah.
So again, the world is an interesting place.
Yeah, it is interesting, no doubt.
I think that we look, Jane, through the IASBO, they look for different ways to share resources. I think you're seeing more and more districts because of the consolidation study and recommendations, looking and having those discussions about sharing resources. It's really important that we have the discussions early, though, because as you know, as you plan for your future for administrators and administration, every district has that. So if you're thinking about sharing an administrator of some kind for anything, those discussions have to be early on so that it can be in both districts or 3 districts' plans. So it is an interesting world right now. But I think it was great data. I appreciate it, Jane.
Thank you.
Is there anything that stood out for you at all that was like an aha or I'm proud of, or? I was very proud of our scores. I think we're doing well. I think we have room to grow. And as I shared with you last year, now I'm going to try to figure out how to find benchmark districts out of state. Because as you know, we have kind of some system in Illinois. Nationally, we're all very different. So even though we think we really can't do apples and apple comparisons here, we really can't do comparisons between us and other districts out of state until they have some kind of national comparison data. So that's going to be one of the things I'm going to spend some time working on over the summer is what can we look at so we can find districts similar to us.
Is it a North Shore thing relative to the number or percentage of teachers that have master's degrees, or is it statewide that you see like 80% of your teaching staff having masters?
I've had high numbers with that. A lot of it sometimes is based on tuition reimbursement.
Well, I recognize it's there, and also the way the wage scale works, you're incented to go get your master's, but I was just wondering if it's more of a North Shore thing, or if it's statewide, then that's interesting as well. But
Coming from a unit district downstate, because you have a high school, and it was a high-performing high school, we had a pretty high percentage of teachers with master's degrees there. I think high schools have a little more teachers with advanced degrees as well.
I had a very high number in 2 districts ago, and that was a large district also, so. But it depends on the tuition reimbursement and the salary schedule, but I also think the main thing with a master's degree is teachers want to be better teachers. And so I'm proud of that fact. I think we see it in the classrooms. So it's something to be very proud of all the way around. Anything else?
Thanks again, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay.
I do think next time when you print it, you could get it a little smaller.
A few more columns.
Yeah, but then I want
Jane,
to,
I'll take the enlarged picture.
Okay.
then I want a magnifying glass with my name on it.
Right, and a light.
Actually, I will need that too, Jane, just so you know. The next thing we have here is policy discussion, which is going to be relatively short, because I'm going to walk you through, since this is, besides having the individual policy discussions we've had, I want to walk you through what I see, and then I need some direction with you on a couple that we really need to make some changes on. So if we start with policy 1.30, I just want to bring your attention to it because this is a policy that will totally change when the strategic plan is done. So basically, this policy will take on the new philosophy that's determined by you and ECRA and all of us working together when that's done. That's all I wanted to bring to your attention. It was reviewed in 2007. That's something I take a look at when I look at the policy manual. Because if I know that laws have changed since that time and we haven't reviewed it, that's a concern of mine. So I just wanted to point that out to you. The next policy is policy 2.20. I think it's a very important policy, just as a reminder to board members on all the different things you do. And I think for a community member to take a look at this and see, wow, board members have lots of responsibilities here. So there have not been any laws that have changed on that, and it looks like you reviewed that the last time in 2010, but it's a good policy to go back
What
to.
I noticed on that one is that it had nothing about strategy.
Nope.
So that was really strange. I mean, typically on a board, I mean, public company boards, it's governance, strategy, and succession, right? Shouldn't be a whole lot different here. We have a lot of governance, that's what policies are all about.
Right.
But it was just, nothing about strategy at all. And of course, that's what we're working on, and it's a core theme going forward, and something we're going to keep near to mind. So I think when we look at this one again, I think something about the responsibility of the board to have a viable strategy that's, reviewed yearly or annually or updated, whatever the case may be, I think is going to be important to do.
That's
Succession,
a
I'm
good
not sure
point.
about, but I would like to think that somewhere the board has a responsibility to ensure that we have a very robust, administrative, succession plan, so that we're not always caught short, oh, somebody left, now what are we gonna do now?
That's a policy, so I can bring that the next time too.
Okay.
You have a policy on that, that's been adopted by all of you as a board, on succession planning.
How are we doing?
We'll talk about that at the next meeting.
Anyway, I thought strategy was missing there.
Is that something that, and I'm gonna tell you which policies we're bringing back. Do all of you, would you like to add a strategic planning bullet point here to ensure that we always have a working, living strategic plan? Then I'll bring that back with some wording the next meeting.
And the other thing I think is missing from here is our responsibility relative to communications and transparency.
Okay.
And transparency, I think we've talked about that a lot in the last 12 months, and I know we're to have every effort to make sure that we communicate everything and are as transparent as possible, but, that's a role, somebody should know that's our role, that's what we take.
Terry, are you saying something different from what's in 19 or something stronger?
You see, what is 19?
Communicating the school's activities and operations to the
Yeah.
community?
So maybe beefing that up a
Something
little bit?
stronger.
Well, I was just thinking this policy, the one we're talking about.
No, that's it. No, that's number 19 in this policy.
Mine isn't numbered, you got it numbered?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
What, that's fine. The whole last one.
But it could be stronger.
We'll just
Yeah,
beef it up.
make it stronger.
I'll bring you some language and then you
Okay.
guys can, but that'll be first reading at the next meeting.
I was wondering-
I want to hear from you.
With regard to this one, I was wondering how this aligns with any publication that the IASB may have. I'm wondering if that needs to be
Mark, that is a great question.
merged or thought about.
Because what I'm gonna do, because, again, this is new, so I wanna make sure that everybody's on the same page with this.
Because usually they're pretty thorough in the stuff we read about them.
The IASB publishes their press, which is what you've all worked with. I've been told they bring a stack of press policies, you look through them.
Yep.
So the bottom line is that these are always going to align with the IASB press as long as the press is being brought to you. Now, let me give you an example. I have an October version that I've looked through. There's no immediate law changes, so I wanted to get through these because a couple of these are high priority. And then we have work to do on a packet of IASB materials that we still haven't worked through. But in answer to your question, you reviewed it in 2010. My guess is that if you were to look at the press, which I can give you all passwords so you can look at it anytime, if you wanted to, it's going to be exactly what IASB is recommending,
This came
because
from
press
my-
comes from them.
This came from IASB, our policies.
Okay.
Almost all of our policies have.
Press, yes.
So this district has adopted, with the exception of, I think it was a social media or something you guys worked on last spring for a long time.
Yep.
And then the other thing I was wondering about this one was in other policies that we've going to see here, and also we've seen at other times when it talks, there's often references to job descriptions. We don't have job descriptions for board members. I'm wondering if we should. Specifically, some of the particular jobs, the secretary, the vice president, the president, and then.
There's a policy on that. In fact, I'll bring that policy too. Policy on positions. There is about board policy in section 2 about what all the different roles are on a board. So I'll find that. And I'll bring that too. Okay, so these are all good questions, because this is really, short of talking about things that have come up with issues, we really haven't done any work together on this yet. So I've got down that I'm gonna bring back section, or policy 2.20 with some suggestions, both for strategic planning and transparent communication. And then I'll bring the board roles policy, because there is one already. Any other questions on that? 3.50, I want you to take a look at. The reason I saw this is, as we move forward to looking at retirements for administrators, I really want you to take a look at the policy itself, because it's the way I read it is that everybody would have the same work year, everybody would have the same type of contract, so I think that might be something that we'll have to take a look at and talk about in the future. So,
I saw that as well, and I thought the issue that I thought was missing here is how do you deal with the exception? Who approves it?
well, and it doesn't say that on, the board always approves the exceptions because you do the final approval on personnel.
Well, I was just saying that,
Well, we look at the contracts, right, where it stipulates whether or not they're in keeping with that or not in keeping with it.
well,
Exactly.
I don't know if we've always seen that level of detail that's required,
No.
because we've had
You guys-
people who have different administrative years.
You do have contracts, you got contracts for approval, though. Right.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, with the exceptions haven't always been highlighted.
Okay.
I
Put
think
it
that
that
would be a
way.
good description, yes.
Okay, so maybe we have approved them, but we didn't know. they were
So
approved.
what I'm hearing you say, Terry, is if it's the same contract with some changes, it might be nice to have the changes like highlighted or
So we
bolded,
know what exceptions we're approving.
so you know what changes.
Yeah, or mention made that
Point it out.
that it differs from our policy.
Yeah, this is an eight-month contract versus 12-month or something.
Okay. I think that's important. 4.20, we need to spend time on, but I'm gonna highlight this again and say, we may not be able to have the discussion until your strategic plan is done.
Got it.
So if I hear that that's okay to hold off on until strategic planning, I'll hold off, or we may have some time even at the next meeting to further discuss this.
I thought we made it pretty clear that we were waiting until the strategic plan was completed.
So, well, there were,
We
a
did.
couple people felt a little different, so you wanna just hold off with the,
Well, for that one, I guess I have kind of a question and a thought. So I'm gonna assume that probably what we have in place right now, that little paragraph on fund balances.
Right here.
That's probably something that we also got from the IASB press, correct?
yes. No?
Sorry, no.
Because it looks very similar to that. Okay.
No, because we just adopted this, yeah, I mean, the wording may be, but what administration took to the board at that time was just, we want a minimum of 25%.
Okay.
It looks very similar to the IASB.
Yeah.
We both kind of said, well, okay, so my only comment about this, strategic planning can take a while. I think one of the things we're probably gonna wanna do is look at, if that's all IASB Press is providing is something, you know, short, and it seems like we may be interested in providing something that's a little bit more detailed, more specific. I don't know if it'll be longer. Maybe we need to start looking for have somebody start looking and pulling together some other.
You have those. I think we have them in, I'll look back and remind you guys, I think they were in the November board packet.
They're all over the board, though.
There were quite a few of them. Probably I pulled maybe 5 of them from different districts. Barrington was in the group, if you remember that. So you have some examples of longer ones. And we did talk at that time about waiting till strategic planning, but we also, a couple people voiced, well, I think we need to have some further discussion on this before we decide to wait. So that's why I'm bringing it back.
Yeah, I mean, the strategic plan is gonna, you know, wrap up, and then we'll have probably some committee work for implementing specific measurable objectives and stuff like that. But in the meantime, we're also gonna come across, you know, additional budgetary decisions and levy stuff is gonna come up. Because I could see I could see that all of the strategic planning stuff not maybe being done by next fall. Or by this fall,
I think
by
that
fall of 2013.
I think you'll have enough information to start work on it after it's voted on in March.
After the strategic plan is voted on in March.
Right.
Okay.
I think
All
you'll
right.
have enough.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is I would like to go into the next budget and levy discussions.
With this in mind.
Having had some discussions, even if we don't have it completely resolved, but having some,
I think that was, all 7 of you stated that was a priority
okay.
before we get to the, even remotely close to the budget season.
Just not kick the can down the road.
All right, so let's see. The next one is revenue investments. 3 of you, as we had reported out at one of our past meetings, attended an oversight meeting at the IASB for training for revenue. And a couple of you asked me to bring this because you might have some questions, or, so I have that on my list of things to bring back. So, anybody have questions?
Yeah. Well, not a question, I don't have a question, just a comment. The second paragraph under investments, where it talks about the standard of prudence, boy, do I hate that. That is just so, that is a trouble waiting to happen when I read that. It's so vague, it's so, it concerns me. The wording concerns me that it needs to be much more specific. You know, it's, use the judgment and care and circumstances then prevailing, that persons of prudence, discretion, and intelligence exercise in the management of their own affairs. There's a lot of idiots out there in their own affairs.
Can I ask one question?
Well, we were talking
Jane,
about
aren't
this
there pretty
person.
specific investments that school districts can make?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it goes on to talk about that
You
down
can't
below.
haul off- You can't haul off and
Right.
just choose things that aren't the acceptable financial investments
golf
for a school
course.
district.
I can't invest in gold or.
I actually think it's pretty limited.
Right.
as to what school
Right,
districts.
so that's what I'm
Further,
saying.
it is down, especially, it even gets into it.
But Mark, by law, we're limited in the things that we can invest in.
I'm just saying, that paragraph, I don't like it. I don't like it.
I think at least some of that language is terms of art. Terry, you might know better than I do regarding business judgment rules, standard of prudence.
it's pretty common
standard
language.
of
Yeah,
care
that's
language. And it's lawyer language.
Try
I
living
don't
with
think
one.
it adds much to
No.
the discussion, right? Because it's not very specific. But I think that those standards that are stated there are generally accepted principles, business principles.
Well, and I think there is even statute that defines what that prudence is. And there's,
Okay,
He doesn't like that word. That'll be a new Mark word.
I just don't like that paragraph. But it does go on to be very specific beyond that, so.
Any other other questions, comments? Because I know you all took a class on this.
Well, I'll say what I noticed. When I looked at our, you know, the board looks at the policies, and then the administration's job is to do the administrative procedures.
Right.
And so what we talked about in that session was, here are some things to look for as a board member. Number one, are there procedures in place that basically implement what your policy says? And when I looked at the procedures, I thought there were several places in it where it was very vague, and probably because we took one of those press, or I don't know, we took a boilerplate from somewhere. So it'll say something like, should be reviewed on a regular basis, where in other parts of the document it says, will be reviewed annually by, and then it has the name of the person that's doing that, or not the name, but the title of the person who's doing that function. And it seemed to me like we needed to shore that up. You know, that administration probably needs to look at those procedures to make those more definite where it says.
We haven't had time to work on it.
I'm sure.
But I will share with you that, and Jane can talk a little bit more about this, because this part's actually new to me, is that PMA also works with our investments, don't they?
Part of them. Well, no.
I don't know how that works.
Illinois School District Liquid Asset Fund,
That's what I'm talking about, okay.
which is a little different than PMA. It's a pool of school districts, so they invest our money. That's reported on the treasurer's report every month. In the treasurer's report, you see revenues, expenses, and fund balance, and then down below, it shows you where all that money is, and the numbers balance all the time. So we have money in several banks, and those depositories, as stated here, are approved by you on an annual basis. And we added one this year.
Once a year?
Yeah.
What month is that usually?
We just did that recently.
We should do it in July,
I know we've done it since I've been here.
but it's done every year. And so we invest money, we use Illinois School District Liquid Asset Fund to manage some of our investments, and they farm out money to the best interest they can get in certificates of deposit throughout the country. We look at it depending on what our cash flow is. If we can invest money for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever, they shop it for us and maintain that. We don't go beyond the FDIC insurance amount on each of those CDs. However, we do have considerable amount of money historically at Northern Trust, and they'll invest it, and we get as good a rate as we can get. In that instance, because we're beyond the $250,000, it's fully collateralized, as is required by law. Any place we have money that's beyond the FDIC limit is fully collateralized, and that is audited as well every year. So we use ISLAF for some investments, but I also then, through local banks and that, work with them on investments, and it's pretty much certificates of deposit is where we're at.
It's highly liquid. We don't have anything really long-term out there.
I got a little bit of money out a year, and I don't like to go out. You don't really get any better rate right now going out that far, and I'm always hoping rates will go up a little bit. So I don't want to lock it in too long, but it doesn't really benefit us. 0.21 versus 0.25 is we're earning pennies.
And
I don't know if that answered, Leanne. Does that address what you?
I don't think exactly, but.
You want to ask me again?
There's no question that we will be taking every section, and I'm hoping we can get started on this by summer, that we just take each section and review and put in our forms. A lot of the forms are already in there. We have administrative procedures here, which I didn't have in my other district until this past year. And we'll review those, but we've got to put that on our cycle. Right. And I'm not sure, I think it's going to need to go on our administrative planning calendar rather than our board planning calendar. The board planning calendar would be like a month where we say, okay, we can now tell you we've reviewed all of our sections and our administrative procedures are up to date. Mm-hmm. So that might be something that we need to add as far as administrative calendar and board calendar planning for review. And Jane, I don't think, Liz told me she didn't think, but I'm just going to ask you. I don't think you've done a review of administrative procedures here at all, have you?
I thought that we had done so, but it would have been several years ago.
Well, and you have
Through
them.
IASB, yeah. It might have been
Oh,
in.
you're right, the
in like-
IASB did it.
Maybe in '08. I don't remember. It's been quite some time ago. Dr. Vick was here at the time.
So we had them reviewed, but typically, a good cycle to get on would be like Jane, since she would be in charge of Section 4, which is finance, and just once a year, she would look through and change any forms that we've changed and make sure that the procedures, if the laws have changed, we've changed the procedures for that, et cetera. So it's just getting that put in our planning, both administratively and reporting out to the board. So it's important. I think you hit on a good point with that.
Yeah, and I realize, you have to prioritize. I understand you've been hit with a tremendous amount.
There's a lot of good progress, and a lot of good things are in place, so. But I think we'll add that to our calendars. We have, as you know, the board working calendar, which I'll try to bring to you once a month to look back over. The other thing I thought of after we left the meeting, and actually I asked Kate to kind of look it over too. We're going to add the Alliance onto our board planning calendar so that they can report out to us a couple times a year too. So I think the more eyes that we look on that and memorialize the decisions we make on that calendar, then that's going to help us do our board planning. So, all right, anything else on 4.30? Next is, these are real easy, but I need to share with you my concern. When you've got 5.185 and 5.250, these are both personnel policies where laws have changed since this time period, and not to mention the fact that you've also had a teacher contract negotiated.
Right.
So this is something where I don't do the work. I would give this to the law firm and say, Terry, we need you to give us the most recent legal policy, and then it needs to align with our teacher contract. I'm concerned that they don't.
They refer specifically to those personnel going to the CBA, though.
Right.
So please refer to the current CBA is the first thing that they say in both of those, which I view as a savings clause that would enable us to say, for those employees that are covered by the CBA, that's what covers them. I think that's the intent of that language. Though, of course, counsel would be useful on that. There have been, however, legal changes that are relevant.
Right, that would affect the employees not covered by the agreement. That's the
Right.
problem, and it's 2007 is what's applying here,
There
yeah.
have been changes to add categories for the FMLA, for example. So these definitely need to be updated, but I'm not as concerned about the CBA because we have that saving language there. But obviously, council would know how to deal with that.
So these are the kinds of things, and as you look at policies, the first thing I do is look and say, okay, when was it reviewed? 2007. Well, there's been changes since then. So if you're looking at a policy or saying, I wonder what our policy is on that, you see a date like that, send me an email and say, maybe we want to review this. And it may be just an affirmation. When we get to the bullying policy tonight, I'm hoping that's just an affirmation that, yes, this is the bullying policy we want. But I think it's good, if I were a community member, I would want to know that the policies that are near and dear to my heart, it might be community use of our buildings, it might be what the board responsibilities are, whatever's near and dear to my heart, I want to make sure that the board has reviewed it within at least a couple of years. Because don't forget, setting policy is really one of the major board responsibilities. So
on this one, you said you're going to go out to legal counsel. Can we make sure too that we understand the consistency between the people not covered by the CBA versus what's in the CBA? Because I don't know if we intend to be consistent relative to personal days and all that kind of stuff, but if there's inconsistencies, I think we should be aware of those. Because certainly to the extent that if it is, in fact, not consistent, if the administrative staff not covered by the CBA has richer benefits than what's covered in the CBA, we got to deal with that, because it's going to come back through the next collective bargaining agreement, if anybody chooses to look at it. So I just think that the board should be aware of where it's consistent versus not consistent, and I think then we should finalize what the policy should be. But I don't think we've ever gone through, Mary Jane, you and I sat through, we spent all the time with the staff and what, where it was and where we wanted it to go, but we never talked about the group that was not covered by the CBA. And now I'm concerned that we not only aren't up to snuff with the current legal environment, I also, that we have inconsistencies across.
I'm not too concerned about that, because we.
You would have heard about it by now?
They've done a great job of monitoring all that, but I do think that it's good personnel practice to have some of those items available in documents.
Yeah.
And we're working through that, so.
I think that as a board, we should make a decision whether or not we want consistency between.
That's a philosophical issue too,
Yeah,
that I think we're gonna need to discuss. So, FMLA application is gonna be consistent. The difference is that oftentimes non-certified staff, depending on who they are, may not even qualify for an FMLA leave.
Yeah.
So.
You're going beyond
They may not
the whole leave of
have hours.
absence area too, which is
Right.
not FMLA, but anyway, so.
So, and that's the same thing for the next one, which is the leave of absence.
Well, I thought we covered those together. I thought they're both going to go back to
They
legal.
really are. What I'd like to do is
That's why I
just
jumped to
bring
the-
both of those.
Yep.
And typically what winds up happening in my work with Terry on policy, the great thing with Hodges is that Heather Brickman from the firm whom you met in Chicago, those of you that were down, actually sits on the press committee, the press board. So she's part of the policy development, and I think that helps sometimes if we ever have questions on policy. But instead of going word for word, they'll take their template that is up to snuff with the law, and then kind of make sure that it aligns with both our CBA and anything else. So I'll bring that to you.
I can't remember, what's our, how do we deal with military leaves and relative to compensation? So say somebody gets X dollars as a teacher or administrator, and then they are called to military duty and get something less. Do we make up the difference, or they just are left?
I had to make up the difference in
I
Palatine.
don't know if that's a policy. I was just wondering what ours is.
Well,
I don't think
there's
we've talked
laws
about
on it that
Is
you.
there anything,
Oh, I
there's
don't-
no law with respect to making up the difference in cost?
No, I don't think there is.
There is no law.
There isn't.
But a lot of companies do. But
Right.
Right.
I just wondered what we in Lake Bluff want to do or have been doing.
That might be something that we just have to discuss. I don't think we have any
had the
military.
situation.
Well, I know, but it could happen, you know.
I know, but she's just asking what, we've never had to deal with it, so.
I know, I recognize we haven't.
So we can, but that can happen anytime.
Yeah.
So, 6.20, again, I'm gonna come back with you on wording incorporating the new law that says the first and last day of schools need to be a minimum of 5 hours. So I'm gonna tell you that's coming back.
This commemorative holiday thing, do we actually do that across all grades?
By law, we have to in some cases. It depends on the
Whoa, wait a
commemorative
minute.
holiday.
Which one it is?
There are certain, if you look at school code, there are certain commemorative holidays, there must be activities on that particular person.
all
where-
grades.
Yes.
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day, I know. yeah.
There are, legally, you must do that, and for a compliance visit, you must show documentation that you did it.
So for that, it's something that thought going forward, can we just state which of those holidays are included? Because it's probably not Casimir Pulaski Day.
A Casimir Pulaski Day, we're in
Put
school.
in another day next week, and then
No,
your
but then we have to update the policy.
would be- Well, fine point, Terry, and I hope you'll be, you know.
Right on top of
I'm
it.
gonna come back and talk about these policies.
All right, good, we'll expect
Show me what you did on that.
Because Leanne, are you suggesting that we just go to the statute when we need to know what the commemorative holidays are?
Well, I know that's an out-of-the-box kind of an idea, but one might refer to one superintendent who would probably have a good handle on all
School
that.
code is pretty
You're saying
detailed.
call over to district, I'll say, Jean, what are the commemorative holidays this year?
Yeah, I'd like to know that right now.
Actually, it's on the IASB website. I just thought I'd share that with you under their calendar, because we're starting to work on next year's calendar. I want to make an editorial comment on 6.65. I feel strongly that one of the greatest advantages in this district is that we do look at the whole child. It's the whole picture. And I was disappointed to see that the last time this has really been reviewed was 2007. And I think that we need to, I'd like this policy personalized. So this would be something that I want you to think about. I'll be bringing it back. I'm going to put it more in the discussion type, like fund balance, because I think it needs to be tailor fit for our school district because it is a high priority here. So it's pretty boilerplate right now. We may want to add some things from our wellness presentations. I'm going to want to hear from all of you on that, but I do think we need to beef it up a bit.
I agree.
This is what I did over the holidays. I did a board policy walkthrough. Education of homeless children. This is another one where there has been some law changes. And so this one, I'm just going to take the press change and bring it to you. But I wanted you to see what I found in the policy manual. Next one is, if I can get my computer to work. The next one, I want to make a couple comments on field trips. First of all, as we discussed this administrative team today, if you read the second paragraph, all field trips must have superintendent or designee's prior approval, except that field trips beyond a 200-mile radius of the school or extending overnight must have the prior approval of the board. Does that mean anything for any of you? Okay, so.
When did it stop? It used to happen.
Well, it does, I think right now,
You used to always bring those to us.
I think it's probably Nate. I'm gonna talk to Nate about it tonight.
No, I couldn't have told you it stopped because I remember it happening every year.
Well, it happens at the elementary school too, so it's not all
Right.
No, I just,
No,
not
that's
just
why.
Nate.
Just to,
We
just
have
to be equal opportunity here.
No, not just Nate. Nate was here.
overnight very often.
But I didn't realize it had stopped.
The fifth graders do.
What we're gonna do is on that magic board planning calendar, you're gonna see on there, Nate and I are gonna work at his
Yeah, they do
school.
in Wisconsin.
Shelley and I are gonna work
Because
at
we would
her
always see the
school.
Rockford trip or wherever it is they go, and we would see the DC trip. The sixth graders do it overnight, don't they? Yeah.
So that's gonna go on our trustee board planning calendar, and Nate and Shelley are gonna provide input on when they think that material can be for you. But that does need to be approved by all of you prior to them going anywhere overnight.
It seems that we've gotten to a point, though, within the district where these things are really routine. Some, like Springfield and Washington, I would say those are, once we're made aware of, they're approved, but then it would be the exceptions to those routine annual things that we'd be more concerned about, because it seems like a big formality just to, oh, we're going to Washington, okay, great, and do you approve it? Sure.
But that's board policy.
But I'm just saying, if we rethink this thing, why would we, continue to approve things we do every year and people expect us to do every year?
But you know what, I can think of a good example of where the board might be interested in talking about a field trip. Because I don't know all the details, but my understanding, one of our field trips is very expensive and
Washington's
a
expensive.
pretty big group of kids doesn't go on it, which I can only imagine could create, social work background, could create all kinds of concerns and issues for the kids and the staff. That to me seems like something that, the board could talk about.
Well, okay, but I'm just saying, as long as we've been doing DC, why do we keep approving it? But that's a whole different philosophical discussion. Are we going on trips where it's not inclusive?
Right.
That's a whole different discussion, really.
And who's gonna pay for the trips?
Right.
I'm gonna bring something to your attention that I think, and this is something that I'm gonna want Terry to explain to you. Because, now, we're not on federal free and reduced, Terry Hedges. We're not on free and reduced here, the federal
I'd
program.
refer to my lawyer over my left.
But if we're going on field trips, I'm gonna make up something, all right? Let's say that we're taking the kids on a field trip to, Paris for French class. All right, that's a good one.
There's Texas.
Let's say that we have 3 students that can't afford to go. Technically, if it's a field trip and they can't afford to go, what do we do for field trips when kids can't afford to go? We find payment for them. Eventually, that gets to the point that there's not enough agencies or support. Our PTO groups have been supportive. everybody's been supportive in the community finding money for that, but as a board, you need to look at the big picture of that. And maybe we want to call them something else. That's what some districts are doing to eliminate the responsibility for payment. But we do have a responsibility because these trips, with the exception of Springfield, which is one school day, but it's also one weekend day, are during the course of the school week when school is in session. So it's something that you're going to need to talk about, and I really wanted to bring your attention to this one.
If we have to approve, I think the approval should be well in advance of any funds.
Oh,
being
yeah.
committed. Not, well, by the way, we're going next week, you know. We
Usually
knew that.
those, for instance, I'm going to give you, for instance, we always had the board approval for Washington DC in September. The trip was in May. So, because Nate has to plan, Shelley has to plan way ahead of time to book, it's when they get the costs and get everything lined up.
Okay.
So,
And if there are issues with those, where they're gonna need to make alternate arrangements, that may need to happen even before the beginning of the school year.
whenever we can get the material, we'll get it on the board planning, but I have to rely on the principals to say, when is a good time for you, when is a good time to bring this to the board? Because they're kind of in their own planning cycle with that. So, and we can talk about the value of those programs. We spent a lot of time talking about that today, too. We've been in meetings, Nate, since 8:30 this morning, just so you know. Thought I'd point that out. Bullying, the next one. Every 2 years, according to Illinois school code, we have to approve and kind of re-accept our bullying policy. That is policy 7.180.
Oh, we missed
Now,
that.
you've been doing that. The only problem is I missed, we should have done it in October of this past year to make it up to date. And if we had a compliance visit today, we wouldn't pass it because we have not had board acceptance of this again. So I need to know if there's any major changes that you want to be made, or can you accept the policy the way that it is?
Has it been reviewed by council to make sure?
I wouldn't bring this for council, only because it's an accepted IASB policy.
This is cut and paste out of there?
Pretty much, yeah.
Because the part that jumped out at me is that second paragraph where they list bullying on the basis of, and it lists 35 different things. I worry about when you get into a list of things like that, that you exclude things. And why not just say bullying is start with the first word and then the last words. Bullying is prohibited on each of the following situations. I worry about too much
Not
exclusion.
exclusive to those or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
What page are you on?
Very first part,
Second
second paragraph. The second paragraph lists a whole slew of bullying on the basis of.
That has to be there, because that's the legal definition. Those are all the legal exceptions. Susan, you want to share that?
Well, those
Explain
are
that,
in
please.
employment law. I don't know whether they're in the school code. You would know.
They're
But these are the
using
employment
law for this.
protected categories in employment law
Those
listed
have to be
there.
in it.
Conceivably, there are others.
No, because if there were, IASB would have adopted those. These are the legally accepted. Do you see anything in there?
In each of the following situations.
do have
But is
those
your
every
point, is your point, though, it doesn't matter whether or not the person is bullying only the minority students, right? If they're
Bullying,
engaging in bullying
period.
behavior, we as a school district don't care.
And then it comes down, it does talk about the definition of bullying, another paragraph down below.
We could move things. This particular paragraph is strongly recommended by any attorneys.
But couldn't it say, so it says, we don't accept bullying for these 32 reasons.
Or under any circumstances.
Or for any other reason.
Not covered, specifically
Not
covered
covered.
above. I think there's some,
So talk to the lawyers about that. I can hear what you're saying, Mark. In employment law, we limit it to the ones where we have to do, but I think we're going beyond that.
to have that paragraph.
But I
saying-
wonder if there's a way to say, and even
cetera.
even if it's not based on one of these protected categories.
Oh, I see what you're
we
saying.
Still
why
have a
don't,
policy against it.
Susan, look at that last line, or any other distinguishing characteristic. Let's take out the word distinguishing, or any other characteristic.
or maybe not based on a characteristic at all. I mean, right? I mean,
Perceived characteristics or distinction, yeah.
I don't know. It's an
So-
interesting thought. That might solve it.
Maybe Terry says it is covered, but when we ask her.
So specifically, the second paragraph
Is
suggestions.
it holistic enough, comprehensive enough to?
Then my other thought on this whole thing was, to Nate's point about, we now have the tip line on the website. Maybe that should be mentioned in there somehow.
Well, that would be an administrative procedure, that wouldn't
Well,
be
the policy
policy.
could be say that we have to have one. The board requires one.
Could do that.
Sure could.
I like it.
So basically, you want me to say something, the district must have,
A vehicle for reporting such behavior anonymously.
And we'll respond to those, any concerns
We'll
or.
log them and document them and respond.
Nate, you do that at your school? Or- Who has that, because you guys presented it tonight. Who has it where they can report anonymously? So you do have it. So you could help me, you could help me set it up district-wide then.
Or the people who built the website.
There's not such a thing at the elementary school? Oh, well, there's a problem.
Well, there's an issue about who those go to and who's responding to them, because that can take a lot of time.
Sure.
Because it's anonymous, somebody has to filter through that.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with it, right?
Well, some anonymous ones, you can't do much about it, other than just say, okay, I heard it, but, it didn't give me a name, I don't know, I
You
can't.
can log them, and if you get a lot of anonymous ones about the same issue, that might be something.
How much feedback do you get on yours?
When we introduced it to the students, I would say within the first week or week and a half, we probably got 5 or 6. Since then, I've probably got another 5 or 6 in the last 3 months. So
That's
not
what you
a lot.
expect.
So it's not overwhelming
And
to you?
Of those, all but one chose to tell us who they were, and were very specific that I would like to talk to you about this. And so it was
So that was-
interesting. We provided them an anonymous tool, and they simply used it as an opportunity to get in the door, and it was wonderful, it was great. And they were really very happy about it.
They want you to
Might
use
get
the
a
phone.
microphone.
I have to apologize, we're getting through the committee of the whole meeting, our first one live here.
Sorry, I couldn't hear me unless I was in front of the microphone. To answer your question, we were talking about the online anonymous reporting tool, and we haven't been overwhelmed by students using it. My answer to your question was that we have probably 5 people who use that tool within the first week of it being up and running, and since then, we've probably had another 5 that have used it, so maybe 10 total. And actually, most who've chosen to use it have chosen to tell us who they are and provided us an opportunity to get more information and investigate and respond appropriately. So it's been a nice tool to have.
Is there anything in the school that reminds the kids that it's there, like because I know in the past, I've seen posters about bullying. Is there anything on those that maybe says that there's a way to report things?
Well, no, though we rolled this out in November, so we really just introduced it.
Just
you know,
started.
Just started it, but I think it's worthy of reminding kids at least a few times a year about it. It's right under, it's part of, when you click on Contact Us on the home webpage, that's the
Tip sheet,
online reporting
yeah.
tool is right there, and
Yeah,
they
saw it.
can click on that. Yep.
Oh, Kate wants to add something too.
Sorry, I just want to add this in because if you're considering to make this policy, we've had a lot of discussion of these sort of panic buttons or anonymous reporting tools within the community task force. And my point earlier was that sometimes these things, if you're going to make it policy, you have to be aware that somebody has to monitor this. And a lot of the time, it may be nothing. But over time, people can become complacent. And if somebody's really using that tool in a crisis situation, you're going to have to make sure that somebody is honestly tracking that. So making it policy, I think you have to add in that extra caveat that somebody is responsible for monitoring that, and then what do they do with that information?
Kate, do you see a difference between, I think in our earlier discussion when we were talking about the quote-unquote panic button or someplace a parent can turn to for that information. I see that totally different than a report of bullying, because it really would need to go to principals, because it's a student issue.
Is it just for bullying, or is it for?
No, the question was, is it just for bullying? No, when we presented this to kids, we presented them with a variety of examples of when you might use this. It could be that you were a bystander or a victim of bullying. It could be that you're worried about a friend who is hurting themselves or threatening to hurt themselves. We kind of went through all of those, and in fact, those that I've received have been a wide variety. Everything from I didn't feel that my grade on the science test was fair to I modified it to protect but essentially was that, and all the way up to I'm really worried about a friend. So I was a little apprehensive, wondering, well, how many of these are we going to get? And that was the question that I had asked Deer Path when they rolled that out, and it sounds like we've followed the same trajectory. They got quite a few initially, and it's out there for people to use, and people know about it. They're not abusing it. They're not making it. Obviously, kids could make something up and put it on there. I think that our students are well prepared for it, and have been taking it seriously and not abusing that resource that's there. So I've been
Nate,
pleased with it.
oh, go ahead.
Do they have that going on at the elementary there too, or just the
I don't
middle?
know. I don't
It
think
does
so.
come up on the main page, though, when you go down to the Contact Us button.
In there, at their elementary?
No, well, this is the district.
District page.
When you go to hit the Contact Us button, it is one of the options, incident report form, and then it comes up as Lake Bluff Middle School incident report form.
Nate, if someone fills out the form, does it show up to you as an email?
Yes.
So it doesn't sit in a box somewhere where you have
And
to
it's-
go check it, it comes to you?
And it doesn't just come to me, it comes to the social worker and the psychologist as well, and
Okay.
we work together as a team, and sometimes it's something that I will handle, and sometimes it's something that one of the social workers or the social worker or psychologist already has some background on and can jump right in and.
But it does obligate, I get where Kate's coming from with that, because it does obligate us, if we start something like that, we have to have the personnel to follow through. You have to follow through on those.
Right. Well, and it's nice because it has it's set up to document, and it gives us the opportunity. I can always go back and look at these things. When was it sent? We go in and we're not ultra detailed in what we've done, but we were able to write down addressed, received, taken care of, and I've got a running record of those things.
So if in May you think, gee, I think I've heard this issue a couple of times before, you could look at that history and see when and whether there really is a history of something
Right.
or not.
Right, and we have other mechanisms for recording that. Power School has a incident log that I keep for all of those disciplinary type things. But yeah, that's another way to do it. Yeah.
And while I feel there's a big part of me, we're going to have to investigate before I because I have to bring it back, I have to check with Terry on this anyway. But when you've got elementary school students, you've got a whole different range of reporting. Johnny touched me versus Johnny could be harassing me. So there's a difference, and I think the level of time at an elementary school to investigate takes longer, because I've done both. So we may have to I want to find out what Lake Forest is doing.
I wonder if we would get more reports from parents from the elementary school. My child experienced this.
Yeah.
With the other,
Now we're handling through, they call Shelley, but I don't know if they all call
You can
Shelley.
report as a parent on here, though. It does ask your role, and it's parent or student.
But it goes to the middle school, though.
This one goes to middle school, yeah.
just to provide a little perspective, with the understanding that this has only been up and running for 2 months, the vast majority of communication that I get about things that I need to be investigating don't come through that tool. That's a very small percentage. I'm hearing from kids directly, or I'm hearing from parents directly, and that's honestly the preferred method, because then I can ask questions, then I can have a dialogue, talk about what we'd like to do, what next steps are. It is somewhat restrictive if I get an anonymous, this is what happened. Well, how do I proceed then? Because maybe I don't even have
You've reported that most of what you've gotten through this web tool have, the people have told you who they are.
Right.
And so my question would be, are these people who have not typically come to you directly, face-to-face, and so have you given them an avenue of reporting where they were hesitant to before, or is it the same people?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think
It's a small sample
I
size.
think there was a group of kind of tech-savvy kids who said, "Oh, here's a way that I can."
Yeah, I mean, I was just
can
wondering,
get on Mr.
are you
Blackwood's
giving,
agenda, and
are
I
you
don't-
giving
I just
someone
wait for
too
him to
shy
come
to
and
come
contact
to
me.
you?
I'll
rather
send
than
them a quick
an
note.
email
You know
it?
what,
And-
I kind of like it as
Just
a
wondering,
way
are
of
you
protecting
giving
the
someone
school
too
district,
intimidated
too.
to walk into
Because
your
if
office
somebody
a tool
said, well,
to?
this didn't return my
Perhaps,
call, or
yeah,
didn't
perhaps.
respond,
And
or
I've
whatever,
had kids
there's
email
a
from time to time,
fail-safe.
but it's just one more opportunity, one more way in which kids can feel comfortable. And I guess, to be real honest with you, maybe it's something you want to wait a little more on, and I could come back to you with some hard data on how it's been used throughout the year, how many I've gotten, you know. I'm
Well,
happy
and
to do
that would be
later on.
something too, as we talk about this policy, it might be better to talk about it at the next meeting, because Shelley will be here and we can kind of get a big picture of it.
Yeah,
So why
still
don't,
very new to me.
I'll check on the second paragraph, the holistic and comprehensive paragraph that Mark had talked about, and then we'll continue to talk about, we may want to loosen up the wording for the first couple of years with, we'll look into or investigate or
Provide where feasible.
provide
You already
where
have it. You
feasible.
already got it for
Well, we have it
middle
at
school, yeah.
one. I'm concerned at the elementary school with the volume of work there. I'm concerned about it.
Well.
So, but yet I know that she investigates bullying incidents
But
that are
at a minimum,
reported to her.
the thing that's on the district website should be, if the parent wants to use
Right.
it, you know, it doesn't have to be the kid, but the parent could fill out a form. So, whatever, you get to think
So
about
it's
it.
something to think about. We'll bring this back at the next meeting. Thank you both.
Thank you.
The last one, and I just need some direction, because we're gonna need to have an extensive conversation about this. We've got community use of facilities, here's our policy, 2007. And then I had sent to you yesterday, just for your reminder, the fee schedule. So is that enough information to engage in a meaningful conversation for you guys at the next meeting?
Sure.
Do you need anything else from us before that?
Yes.
What do you need?
Well, isn't the reason that we're revisiting this because we have issues between the fees and their descriptions not matching what's in the policy? Don't we need a little bit of direction about how those would be better worded? Isn't there some issue about, there are certain groups that, under this policy, could use our schools that would probably not be appropriate?
It's my understanding that there was a recommendation made, but I think there was a lot of mixed feelings on the board with it. So I think instead of us taking the time to provide that data, that's kind of why I'm bringing it to you here today. What are you looking for? You need to provide us some more guidance. I don't mind rewriting definitions for,
Well, that's, I think, where we ran into an issue is how you interpret what those categories are and who's in it and who's not. And again, I don't think you need to write a novel or, you know, to get there, but I think the consistent interpretation of what those categories represent, it would be really positive. And then I think the other thing sort of bothers me is that if an exception is going to be made, which you did, where's that in the policy that gives you the approval or authority to do that, you know? So I know you did what you did, you told us you did it, but, you know, so I think, you know, if we're going to have a policy and it's pretty clear what those categories are and we're consistently applying, that's fine. How do we resolve if we debate, you know, somebody fits in this category versus another? I don't know if there's a process for that, but once we've locked in and we said this, and then you come back later and say, well, I just talked to the person I think otherwise, I think we have to give you, if we choose to, we have to provide for the exception, because there's no provision for that today. So in theory, your exception wasn't part of we didn't give you the authority to do that. So it's a touchy issue, I get it, but I just think I don't know how to make it less touchy.
Did we ever,
Am I remembering incorrectly? I thought Terry had some suggestions about wording too for that, Terry Hodges.
I don't remember that.
About that.
I'd have to go back and look.
I think that she did.
I'll go back and look. See, Jane's giving me, I don't.
I think
We'll go back and look.
a couple of things. I think where we have, at least for me, the discomfort is that category of for-profit groups could include, you know, the local gun show, right? I'm being facetious, but you know, anything could be a for-profit group, right? A craft and jewelry show, whatever. And what we were talking about in that instance was a very child-focused program, albeit for profit, but child-focused, serving the needs of these children and children beyond the community. So rather than have that debate again, I will just say that there is a major difference between the local jewelry or gun show and what that particular organization is doing. I also think, and I can't remember if I sent it to you or not, but every time I get the Horizons flyer, I am concerned about those chess wizards. What in the heck are we doing with those chess wizards? I mean, I love chess as much as the next guy, but
They should not be on a school flyer. Unless we did background checks on them and we were certifying that they're,
so we have to be cautious that we're being consistent. And, you know, we're not saying, oh, the chess wizards are for profit, but they're doing something academic. And I just don't think there's any reasonable distinction between those two.
Can I ask a couple clarifying questions? All right, because this was something that I had before. If I am a French teacher and I am going to offer after-school French to kids, and I am applying, I'm for profit because I have nothing to do with the school system, but I'm gonna educate kids here in French after school. So, versus Mary Jane here is going to have her jewelry show. But we're both for profit. So you're saying basically there should be a line drawn between student activities and that's one question.
That's possible. I think there's a reasonable distinction.
And then,
but we're talking two different issues in my opinion. One is the issue of what the facility fee is and whether we're letting them use the facility. The other issue is, are we selling this program like it's part of the stuff that we provide and our teachers who we know and love are providing?
Right, the chess wizards, I think,
That's
is a
different.
different issue, right?
That has.
that's all, I understand chess wizards to be a whole separate issue, right?
But I bring it up because it's not clear to me that they're paying rent. But
I will tell you with community use, if you have a policy that is very general, anybody could use, you can't discriminate on community use with that. Unless
But
you
you
have
can-
specific organizations that you're saying, I'm trying to talk around this issue. I think we have to be careful. That's why I include the community use policy. We need to have, I want Terry to look at that, actually. But I think that we've got three issues, actually. We've got the fee structure. What I keep hearing from all of you, and I wish I had tapes to go back and look at from last year, but some of them were committee of the whole, is I do think the issue here is the for-profit groups, how you want to define that. And different districts do it different ways. How do we do scouts? Do we have scouts use our building?
Well,
And what do we charge them?
well,
This year.
according to the policy we do.
I know, but there were scouts using the building without the knowledge of the business office for free. So in the second group up, I had my assistant say, you can use it this year for free, but please know, effective next year, we have this fee structure.
So that's the third issue.
Yes, I think we need to revisit that. I'm involved with Girl Scouts, so, you know, full disclosure, but I get a lot, people are dumbfounded because from the beginning of time, kids have always done Girl Scouts or probably Boy Scout, Cub Scouts or whatever too, at a school without paying for it. It's for the children of the district. It's run by residents of the district. It's not for profit. Also, I mean, their whole budget for facility might be $20 for the year for the troop. So,
And they have background checks on them by the scouts. The scout leaders have background checks on them.
I'm gonna, see, that's why, that's why I bring scouts up, because I think that it's really those three issues. I will share with you, neither Jane or I have any preference anyway. We want our guidelines to be clear enough that we don't have these issues.
We just don't want every group to come up as a major, gee, what are we gonna do? We need to have some clarity, so we can say, here's what the fees are. Because everybody that rents the facility, I can't tell you,
think
Tammy
we also-
spends an exorbitant amount of time as it is, what's the fee structure?
Yeah, I
And we
agree.
have
But didn't
to,
we also talk about, and I think we can't lose sight of the fact that anybody who operates in our schools after hours needs a level of supervision provided by the district.
yes.
And, you know, so whether it's a scout group or anything, in theory, we're liable if we don't have somebody on that premises making sure things, you know, kids aren't getting hurt or whatever, all that kind of stuff. So don't lose sight of that requirement that we have. And so it costs money to do that. And we have to ensure we don't get lackadaisical about that. Otherwise, we just, you know, we put ourselves in a world of hurt. Somebody, all well-meaning, gets hurt and, you know, they'll sue us and we wouldn't have done our due diligence and done the necessary safeguards to ensure that kind of a thing didn't happen.
So there are at least two issues, and I think I'm the one guilty of conflating the two. So let me try to parse them again. One is,
It's just-
we,
no guilt.
one is,
Solve it.
one is we need clear definitions that make sense. And we need the buildings put to the use for which they were built, to help educate our children, right? Not for running a gun show or a jewelry show. I think we're in agreement that's a meaningful thing, at least to try to define what we're helping those businesses do, the buildings are meant to do. The second issue, though, and it's not really part of this policy, but it is a concern, is the liability concern for people that we are seen as sponsoring, or the conduct that goes on there in non-district people are in our buildings, right? And that's a separate issue, but it's significant.
But
It
it's also
actually-
part of that fee issue too. It creates part of the rationale for what you charge, because you have to have, you know, expenses incurred to support that
And it
oversight.
actually kind of fits
Right,
in,
right.
which muddies it, because I know one of the groups that we had the disagreement about pays additional people to work in the buildings, to kind of make sure the kids don't go beyond the hallways and all that. I see this as, here's kind of what I'm thinking, just sitting here. If Jane and I were to sit down and just take all the groups that, how many groups do you think we have using our buildings? Millions? Hundreds? 50s? 20s? Just take a stab.
Dozens.
Okay. So, but if we took the groups and to the best of our ability, put them where we thought they would fit in, and then we could work on our definitions of what we believe to be true. What I hear you say, and again, this is where we're not having the clarity, is that yes, we do have liability, and I agree with you on that. That's a concern. I'm gonna tell you, we have night crew in the buildings. We don't have administrators in the buildings.
I'm not sure what the
So-
appropriate level of oversight we need, but somebody has to answer that too.
But we're covered, that's what our liability insurance
And
is for.
night crew is not, they're not our employees. That's a
Yeah, that doesn't
contracted
count.
outside service.
So if that's that big a concern, then that opens a whole nother
Well,
can of
I think the
worms.
insurance companies have to respond to that and tell us what they expect.
They expect us to get a certificate of insurance of any outside group that uses our facilities.
Okay.
So that's it? You don't
And
need to
have we done,
oversight?
have we done that?
Well, we ask for everyone for a certificate of insurance, yes, and we tell them the limits of
Is that
liability.
just for physical loss, or is it if there's a
Predator.
somebody touched somebody inappropriately, we gotta have a suit? How's that covered? I think we need to know more.
So I do think the definitions need to be clear. I think we tried to jam kind of people in, groups into the definitions that are existing, rather than draft definitions around reality, right? And understand who's really
draft the
using. I
definitions.
think that's right. By looking at the dozens that we have and saying, this is one category, why do we think it's that category? Oh, I know, because it's a gun show. You know, do you know what I mean?
Well, that's where we're gonna have a problem, because the way our policy is written right now, we cannot discriminate on groups.
But I'm
So,
assuming we have a policy that says you can't bring firearms in our buildings that would cover us.
I know, I'm being
example,
facetious,
but
but
I
let's
just
say,
can't bring any
let's say jewelry, right? I mean, my point is, it's a for-profit that doesn't have anything to do with our mission.
so
That
what
people
you're
are-
saying is if it involves children,
If it involves children and the education, physical or mental or chess-based, you know,
Oh, don't bring chess up.
education. No, I'm not kidding really about that. I think there may be appropriate fee to charge and appropriate oversight of those folks that make it appropriate for them to be in, not part of Horizons, but be in our schools. But I think a meaningful distinction is whether what they're doing when they're in our building is in
with
furtherance of our overall mission.
Yeah, I think that's important too.
And that's in district, in furtherance of our overall mission, to me is really important. Why did we build that school?
But additionally to that, though, it is our building and it is our liability. Who of our staff is responsible for not only our physical facilities, but for the kids that are there?
we don't have to, what I translated from what Jane just said is this statement of insurance covers us for that. And all districts ask for that.
I'm sure Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts probably have that, I don't know,
Probably through your,
to the council.
I like
The
your,
other thing about Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts is they operate on a time when we still have our building people in
That's
the
true.
building. My
Right.
Boy
They're not
Scout
in there on
meetings
Saturday
occurred
afternoon.
at 3 o'clock, and there was still someone there until 4 o'clock. I mean, all, the
So it's
schools were
not
still
pro-
staffed.
It's nonprofit, it's in furtherance of our overall mission, and the people, we have staff available to be part of the organization. That may
I
be-
myself think we need to be careful about the furtherance of our overall mission, because then we're gonna get into, some groups are gonna say that they are educating children, and then are we gonna make that decision, well, you are, you aren't? I think we,
Well, I think nonprofits, I mean, we're still making a distinction between nonprofits and for-profit.
NVA is a profit organization.
Oh, I know.
I mean,
That's
are
what
we
I'm
just,
saying.
maybe is there a different category for scouts?
see, that's where, and Jane and I are looking for directions, it's got to be clear.
Scouts and Boy Scouts are their own.
And I don't, this may or may not matter to anyone, but I think when we first talked about the scouts, it was mentioned that certain neighbors of ours might be charging those groups, and it may be written down somewhere that they are, but my understanding from talking with people that they aren't. I hope I didn't just ruin a good thing for them, but.
Well, I think the big piece is we just need direction from you, because it's board policy, and we can come up with what we think is good, but Jane, I don't know if you're getting clear directions. I'm kind of lost on this one,
I
so.
think it's expanding, it's becoming a snowball here, because we're seeing so many exceptions to every issue we raise. That is,
See,
does our council not have any suggestions about this?
Oh, I-
We've been over this for 6 months, and we
I-
have no
I don't want to say
clear.
they don't care, but it's kind of.
It's a board decision.
I would,
Decision how you want to operate and manage your facilities.
if I were doing it, what I would do is get the list of 36 or 48 groups that we've had requests from and see if they fall into logical groupings, something less than 48 groupings, right? And if they do, and they're exactly the same 5 we have, then so be it. We've looked at it, right? But I'm guessing you will have them grouped, and they will make some sense, and Scouts may well be in its own group for a variety of reasons. But if I were doing it, I would try to group the ones we know we have requests from into something and see if they don't.
So you're saying group them without
Themselves.
the categories and
And then
where
see
they
what
match?
and then, yeah, right. And then you look and say, okay, why do I think these are likes? Oh, I know why I think these are likes. They do
Well,
I
X.
think what
but
Susan's
for
trying to
profit,
say
not
is
for-
that she'd like to make a recommendation to the board about what she sees.
I get it. No, I see what you're saying. And I'll talk to principals, because there have historically been use of the buildings that business office hasn't been aware of, because they've made arrangement
Right.
with the local level. Not saying that you, Nate, but
We're setting up all the
If it is, Nate,
procedures for
fess up
that.
now, because it's gonna be
I'm not saying.
easier on
even
you.
Shelley, but historically, there have been groups using it that we're not aware of.
So
we'll try to get a good handle
we're
on all of it.
tightening that part up too.
We're trying to tighten it. That, I never knew Scouts used our facility till this year.
Yeah, I did mine.
Oh, yeah, they did all the time.
I know, but.
There are
And
some
that's our
districts,
problem at the district.
Because we need to make sure we're insured. That's the big piece with that.
Have knowledge.
If those groups have insurance coverage, I mean.
Then all we need is proof of insurance.
Yeah.
But we have to
That
have
might
that.
change something.
Because if someone, we're protecting all of us sitting here. If someone gets hurt and we don't have that certificate of insurance and it's outside of school hours, we're all at fault. So, I think that it's tightening up the procedures. We also need to think about the safety and security of our buildings.
Right.
So it's a bigger issue than that. Jane and I will work on something and bring it back to you the
Yeah,
next
you think
meeting.
about how we have access, limited access stuff, and how's that changed over time, and anyway.
So, Jane, do you have enough that you and I can at least sit down and try to? All right, let's see what we can bring back. I appreciate the conversation, we just needed some direction.
You shouldn't lose sight of that security piece, though, because even when you have, like, basketball at the, in the gyms and stuff like that for, these organizations, those doors are wide open.
maybe that's a,
People just
maybe that's a
walk in
way,
and out, you know?
maybe that's a
Actually-
way to where Susan was talking about using the mission of the school as a way to hone down who you allow in the building. Maybe security is an avenue to hone down.
Right, I think there are,
who gets in the building. If a certain group will present a security risk beyond what is typical in the school day,
But according to who?
I'm not sure about that, Mark. I'm just concerned that most of the time, if it's a big group that goes in and out, like there's multiple sessions or whatever, the doors are just basically
always
open.
open.
so I know that you know this, but NVA, since we've been talking about them in a circuitous way, has one door open, and it's the back door, and they have a guy sitting there all the
They
time.
pay someone for security for that.
So, I don't know. I do think that security is a real concern, though. I do think that that's a consideration,
Well,
and
for your
I
gun
also
show
think.
example, that's a great way to keep them out.
Yeah,
Oh, it presents a security risk that,
right.
I'm still gonna go back to, that's why we have to also look at our policy, because we cannot discriminate.
You can't discriminate, but can you make
Can't be in
Safety-
make
conflict.
decisions
safety
about-
decision.
Be there based on
Existing
other
policies.
aspects of your policy. For example, we may have policies about use of alcohol or drugs on our
Which we
property,
do.
or about firearms on our property, or other
That-
illegal.
that we're
business
covered that way.
Rule it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Has to be
just can't
consistent
leave
with it.
anything, we may have a group, the CC Club. I have to make something up. If the CC Club, maybe you guys are familiar with them in town, and, that's a group that's just not safe, well, that's your opinion. So who's going to deem a group unsafe? We really have to be very clear. We need to have clear guidelines and rules with that, because I don't want to be the one that says, and I don't think any of you should be, no, they're not safe, yeah, they're safe. We need to be very, very clear. And I see where you're coming from, so I'm gonna really think about the
snowball,
security
it keeps
piece.
getting bigger and bigger.
But it might
I don't
not.
think
mean,
it
because there's a
does.
difference between an
You're feeling
organization
where our
that has-
frustration
Well, I
is.
know.
There's a difference between an organization that has a 501c3 and an insurance forms or whatever that verify the levels of coverage that are required. There's a difference between
And
that
background
like,
checks on
some
its
club.
adults. I mean, background checks on its adults are also relevant, right?
Right, well, it kind of is, because even if I'm a Girl Scout leader and I go into the school, then saying that I've been background checked, then you can feel a little bit more comfortable.
But now, are you
than
talking
walking
about
down the
events
hall.
only when children are present? I mean, we've had many civic organizations that are completely safe.
Right.
And they probably have not had background checks. I'm
But they're not
thinking
with
of some of the
kiddos.
people that.
Yeah, I think
I
we're
mean,
talking about children.
Again, this.
So while the
children.
school is not
We
an
can
operation.
detail this down to a point where we're gonna be constantly approving exceptions.
Which we don't wanna do.
No.
Jane, does every organization who uses the building, with your knowledge, sign some kind of a form, who's in charge of the group and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
is there, or could there be
Take less.
language on that stating that who in the group is going to be responsible for making sure that no unauthorized people are there and that
Accepted by the rest of
everybody exits the building when they're done?
Yeah, they know that.
Yeah.
That's
mean,
why I think
That's a critical
this-
security piece, is somebody responsible to make sure everybody's out of that building when the group's done. That's critical.
And if it's during the week, then our nighttime supervisor makes sure everything's locked up, whatever.
Yeah.
If it's over the weekend, then we have to place one of our men there, and then I will charge that group for that man's
Right,
labor.
I mean, a
to make
huge
sure
piece of
things are
security
secure.
is procedural, not our evaluation of whether a group's safe or not.
Sure.
Probably the bigger piece is procedural. And if somebody in the group's responsible.
And we have the procedures, I'm not,
So we may have that covered.
I think there's a lot, you all have great ideas. I think we need to come to consensus, because it's been dragging on for as long as I've been here, and I'm sure it's been. So, we're gonna, Jane and I will put something together, and I'd really like to get this done so that you're all comfortable with it. You may not all agree, but you're
So
comfortable.
you might want to talk to Mike about what they just do in Lake Forest, as an example.
Well,
if
I think
anything.
that's where
Well,
this came from.
No,
That's
the fees-
where-
No, the fees came from there, not necessarily the classifications.
policy.
I think
policies
the
and like that.
policy, I think everything came from.
But it's clear the devil is in
No?
the details, right? Policy,
That's a good
written
idea.
policy is one thing,
You don't
and,
even have the problem, I don't know.
Did you, Jane, did you ask him about that? Because I think we've talked about this exception thing before. Like, did they have the same issue with a lot of people asking for exceptions and they don't really?
For their
fit in?
fee schedule, what are you charging, and that's
Oh, okay,
what I gave them.
okay.
Because we had not changed our fees in years.
A long time.
15, 20 years.
And there's, many boards take many different stances on it. So I think you have to take the flavor of your community. That's, as board members, that's your responsibility. I know for a fact, and I'm just stating this because it's a fact, some boards, when there was a lot of controversy with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, said no more scouts in the buildings. That's just a fact. Where most districts came in and said, anything dealing with kids, we want to be able to support. So what I'm telling you is I think all of you have to do some soul searching on how you want to represent the community, and then we got to get the policy done. It's much easier so we don't have to grant exceptions. But what I hear you saying is that maybe there should be something, some kind of a loop, not a loophole, but something in there that says if the superintendent and/or the business manager need to make an exception.
That's what you should have for a policy, right? If you set a strict policy and there's going to be exceptions, we have to have a vehicle to allow them. Or not allow, but I assume we're going to allow them.
Well, I mean, it may not be as complex as it sounds, because we're really talking about, I think, modifying, I hate trying to do this on my phone, but I think we're trying to modify these categories a little bit, like so if it's for-profit, but its mission is consistent with the school's mission, and it's providing services primarily to kids from the district, is one group, right?
that might be,
That could be a
it might
chess.
be.
I'm gonna translate that to be a little bit different. I'm gonna translate it, instead of saying missions, because missions can be wishy-washy to compare. So I think it's easier to say involving children, working with children.
Education.
But when you talk about, because this is one of the other issues, some of the organizations deal with Lake Forest and maybe some of the surrounding. So they educate our kids. Is that 10% of the group? Is it 50% of the group? Because that was one of the first discussions I heard when I came here too. I'm like, we need to know from you, okay, if they educate our kids, if even one child's in that group, then that's gonna be the with child rate. But you need to be aware of that, because then that applies to me as the French teacher coming in, that's gonna be coming in and for profit, teaching the kids French, and I'm gonna get a lower rate. Now, maybe that's okay, because we're educating kids. That's your choice as a board. You just need to let Jane and I know so we can get it together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that enhances the educational environment. If you have a French teacher who's providing a program to kids from our district.
Violin, didn't we have violin teachers for a while as part of Horizons, something that was sort of an adjunct to? No, I know, but this violin, well, whatever. I think there is a meaningful distinction here.
I will tell you, we've had requests in the past for a gentleman whose parents have hired to work with their daughter on softball skills or volleyball skills.
Who's what?
Who wanted to work one-on-one with their daughter on, like a private coach. To use, want to use the gym. You know,
So-
in that instance, I would consider that a for-profit. He wants to use, you know, a public facility to make some money, more power to him, but it's a
And there's a fee.
taxpayer-supported.
And there's a fee, right? And if it was $40 an hour, it might be a prohibitive fee, but it doesn't need necessarily be $100 an hour, right? I mean, that's what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, it may or may not, but what I'm saying is that it's educating a child in that case rather than several children, but a child in that case. And we're not saying give it to them for free. We're saying give it to them for $40 an hour rather than $100 an hour, which may be, you can't charge much more than $40 an hour to the parents, right? Maybe. I don't know.
Issue is I don't want them shooting softballs and baseballs around in our gym, so.
Physical damage, yeah.
Good example, though. So that, go
I
ahead.
mean, but what you're saying is true, so there should be more to it than here's the fee structure. There's considerations of, you know, if in the judgment of the administrator, whoever, these activities could damage school property or be dangerous to participants.
And we do that anyway. We won't let him come in and hit.
Maybe we need to
Makes
put
fun
that in
too.
policy, though, is what she's saying. Too much?
It's too much. I mean, common sense does come into play in some of this. We won't let him do anything that we feel is going to damage property.
And all I'm saying is we should write that down.
Maybe administrative procedures.
Possibly, yeah.
Or maybe the forum could, you know, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that,
There has to be some leeway for administration to not allow a group to come in.
You don't want to have a gun show?
That's an easy, but.
Moving right on with that comment. Is everybody ready to move on? I
Oh,
will
yeah.
bring you some changes with, that gives us enough guidance to move forward, because we really needed to get some feedback on that. All right, discussion of superintendent evaluation.
okay. So, Leanne and Mark and I met with Jean some time ago with our evaluation tool that we had. We talked about some minor changes to it. And then we talked about wanting to get this evaluation done early after the new year, because there will be a process that will take us some time to get through. So we had talked about pretty much the process that we wanted to follow. So the three of us have kind of talked recently about trying to set some dates to this evaluation, so that we can finish it up this spring, and if we so desire, can make a decision about whether or not we want to talk about contract extension. That being said, jump in, guys, anywhere here. Jean is going to be working on her self-evaluation and is going to get that to us by Friday, January 25th, along with a blank electronic version of the evaluation form. We will all then fill out our own versions of the evaluation form, and those will be sent to me by Sunday, February 3rd. I just realized too, either Mark or Leanne, would you guys like to be the collector of those? If you do want to, that's fine. I mean, really, seriously, you can.
Are you asking for?
No, I'm not, I mean, I'm very happy to do it, but I was gonna say if either of you, we didn't
Or
really
maybe you
even-
want to, maybe you guys want to go help her one day do it too. That's a
We'll
choice.
talk offline about if you want.
So anyway, the intent is then that those evaluations will be completed by each board member by Sunday, February 3rd, and at this point in time, they're coming to me.
So is the form going to be such that it's easily used electronically? So, you know, if you ask for comments, it expands and does this?
It's going to be a Word document, so.
I'm working on that.
It's going to be very, very difficult, Terry.
What?
Actually, I'm
No, I-
working on
sometimes
making it a
you
Word
forget-
document.
You forget to save things and stuff, so.
Well, most of it is a Word document, but not all of it.
Okay.
So, working on it.
Okay.
So yes, in answer,
Okay.
we're gonna make it
As
as
best as possible.
easy as we can do.
Then I will take a week and the plan at this point is to compile the information in two different ways. One is to just take everybody's evaluation and I will put that into a PDF form or something so that everyone can see all of those. But I also would like to take the information and put it on one form so that we can see the 7 comments here or the 7 scores or whatever. So that it'll be two different ways that people can look at it either way or both.
Now, MJ, will you be doing that alone, or the 3 of you working on that, or?
Well, that was
They're
that.
gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll figure that out.
So ultimately, will Jean get 7 comments, or will you folks try to synthesize what the sense of the 7 comments are into one? I'm sorry.
We will all be together
I
on the
see,
12th.
never mind.
My sense is that Jean would get all the comments and all the information.
Raw.
Yeah. I mean, unless there's something in the 12th that we decide is like too off the wall to include. But I mean, the point is we would be together on the
Yeah, we're gonna
12th.
get censored again.
Now I'm scared.
And,
But I do think that it's possible that I could write my comments in the evaluation, and then, Terry could say something useful, and I think, you know what, I really should revise that, because that, I forgot she accomplished what
or what I said there, I really meant, I'm gonna change my wording a little
Yeah.
bit, because what I
So-
meant was something that isn't coming across, yeah, so
Hopefully we'll
minimal
have
edits,
a
I would
revision
say,
on that.
yeah. Okay, so that would be on Tuesday, February 12th at an executive session of just the board. That's a committee of the whole meeting. And then, we won't be doing anything the rest of, and then, once we decide what's gonna go into that document, we'll give it back to Jean. And then on Tuesday, March 5th, we'll have a brief discussion with Jean about it, if we have comments or she has questions or comments. And then presumably at the end of the month, we would perhaps be voting if that's what we so choose.
So we're gonna make revisions on the spot on Tuesday, February 12th, to give her the information the same night.
Oh, not
No,
necessarily
not
the
that
same
night.
night, no.
Well, it says following, okay, I'm reading following this meeting, that you'll be given the evaluations, I'm thinking
No.
like right after the meeting, okay.
No, I, definitely maybe sometime that week, because the next week I'm out of town.
Yeah, no, sometime in the next several days after that, yeah.
3 weeks till the next time we meet with her, so
Yeah.
we have some time.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So that's our pretty much not even tentative plan. Because in the midst of all this, we've also got strategic planning meetings and an extra one, and we probably are also going to be having an extra meeting discussing upcoming staff plans. So we're probably going to stick pretty tight to this calendar. Questions or comments?
Is, not meaning anything about you at all, Jean, is it commonplace to, no, either way. Is it commonplace to consider the extension of a contract during the first year of a 3-year? Is that?
I actually had an extension in my last district at the end of the first year, and at the end of the second year in my new 3rd-year contract. So, yeah,
Okay.
it is.
Didn't
And
want to be a
actually-
trendsetter.
Well, the other piece, though, too, is Mary Jane's already talked with the attorney, and I don't know how that's all working with the 3 of them that are sitting on the committee.
Right, and that's what we will be discussing our next meeting together, all of us, in closed session.
So that's really,
Thanks.
I'm gonna finish answering that, just so that you know the logistics of that. Typically, in a 3-year contract, literally a year from now, if I wasn't extended, I'd be looking for another job. That's how fast it goes. So that's why a lot of districts move towards 5-year contracts down the road after they have known the superintendent longer than 6 months. So. That's it. Ready to move on?
Any other questions or comments about that?
Well, just one thing on the timeframe of it, is that we had talked about, kind of related to what you just said, is it feels somewhat early to start this in January, but also, in the same way, if things weren't going well, the superintendent would need to know that kind of in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
You know, if something were gonna happen, so that they could start to, so this isn't an unusually early time in the year to do that evaluation. I just wanted to make that comment.
Actually, that's going to align nicely with the principal evaluation, and that's when you'll see that a lot of the superintendent evaluations are done December, January, February. Those are the 3 months. And again, as we do the work on the board calendar, if this is something you can see that you would need a month earlier, or we could do a month later. But when you really map it out, we've got principal evaluations that have to be done by March 1st. We've got staffing coming up. Again, a lot of districts will do it in December or January, just depending on,
I think that timing is good, and especially if board members see something that you don't see that's going wrong, the sooner it's called to your attention, the better for everybody.
mid-course corrections.
So, yeah, I think that part's good.
All right. Okay. Moving right along, we've got strategic planning update. I had put in your board update last week, but I wanted to point out to you that the full strategic planning information will first be presented at the Tuesday, February 26th board meeting. It was moved back 2 weeks because we extended the time period. And I do think that that helped because we got a lot more responses, and I had put that in.
Good.
So, we will have the full strategic planning vote on the 26th. We will have a lot of, I really see the 5th committee of the whole as more of a board workshop, working on the strategic plan with the administrative team will be here. We have an extra meeting on March 12th. Again, strategic planning, so that that can be done. Because as you have shared with them in the fall, we need to vote on this at the final March meeting before board elections in April. Now, I'm going to carry this further for one big reason, because we're going to have to revise the calendar. When Mary Jane and I talked about the board the calendar, and we'll talk more about that when we talk board calendar, you have a board committee of the whole meeting scheduled for April 9th, which is board elections. In our discussions, we thought it might be a better idea to cancel that meeting because it is election night. Have our business meeting in April, which is the 23rd, and then have a very simple board reorganization meeting on April 30th. So that would be your 2 Tuesdays. Everybody following me with that? April 30th. And then your first cow meeting in May, I'm going to see if Barb Tony can come out for our board workshop with the new board.
So new board members would be seated at that April 30th.
April 30th.
Organization meeting.
What do you think about that? We kind of mapped it out.
That's a week longer than I was planning, Gene.
Some of us shouldn't comment.
When we did our research, Al,
Some of us.
we cannot do it. Canvassing will not be official and reported back to us until Friday, the 26th. So I could call a special meeting for Monday, April 29th.
No, thanks.
But in sticking with Tuesdays, I chose the 30th.
We appreciate your assistance there.
So, can you just make sure that Liz puts all these dates on a little note to all of us, so we can just
All of them
reaffirm everything on the
Yes,
calendar?
I'm actually going to put all these dates on my written calendar. I just went through this at our meeting
No,
yesterday,
I just
so.
think it's helpful, and, you know, we just get one more reaffirmation of all these things. So.
Definitely to all the March strategic
Right.
planning meetings
Yeah.
and these two, yeah.
I will actually try to send you, because I'm one that likes to do things a little differently sometimes, so I might send it in calendar form this time,
We know L's like that as well.
so. And that's the end of the strategic planning. Old business? Because I have one short thing with new business.
And I do too. Anybody have any old business?
The next meeting, I am going to give a very short presentation on the 5 Essentials survey, new state mandated survey. I've sent you information on it. The window is opening February 1st. I have letters that are going out to parents because they will need to get onto our website and click on a link. The parent survey, I believe, is 10 minutes administration. There's specific rules on, you can only fill out one per school and one per household. Teachers are filling it out. Kids, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade are filling it out. And all the information from the survey will not only be sent back to us, but will be posted on the school report card on our website. So it might be nice for you to see what kinds of questions they're asking. So I will do a short presentation on that at the next meeting. That's mine.
Good. And the only other thing I have is the Lake Division dinner meeting for the spring is March 13th. Is anybody available to go to that? You know, this is one of those, we have to send somebody to each of these meetings if we want to be in line for the board recognition.
Do I come?
I did my time.
I have.
I've been, but it's been a little while.
I would be happy to, but I have an NSSAD meeting that night. They're always on Wednesday.
Maybe as a parting gift.
I did mine a while ago, but when's the clock?
It was too long ago.
Be a parting gift?
Yeah. You could cause some trouble at the
I think,
meeting.
Jean, you went to the last one too, didn't you? Did-
Yeah.
With Al and Leanne?
It was very interesting.
So can I say I put in my time?
They are, and you know, this one,
Hey,
this
Jane.
one, this one is Aptekissic, so it's just in Lincolnshire. I mean, it's not,
And the speaker's talking about what?
the speaker is talking about, there will be a briefing for school board candidates prior to the dinner.
That was interesting to me.
Why not?
Oh, let's see, Jeff Arnett, Chief Communications Officer
He's
at
very good.
Barrington, is going
He's
to
a
give a
great
program
presenter.
entitled The Essence of Message. He's going to
He's
talk about
he's a good-
cost-effective, engaging information when staff and resources are limited.
He's very good.
Sounds like an interesting topic.
Yeah, it probably wasted all my years.
So I think
We can nominate Eric.
Eric's not here, so we can nominate Eric.
Oh, Eric.
Volunteering. Eric, what do you say?
You might want to call Eric.
He's watching.
Hi, Eric.
I'm not sure if he is. My son texted in that the November meeting is being shown.
Oops.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's the text message we were looking at.
Oops.
But hopefully it's being taped. Well, according to my son, no.
I think the only thing to keep in mind with the dinners, because I don't think I count with these.
No,
as
you
far
don't.
as-
You don't. It has to be a board
So
member.
if you want to go for this recognition, then someone's going to need to come.
What's the date again?
March 3rd, 3/13/13. I think you should go.
That's an ominous date.
No, it's a good one.
It's a good one.
13.
The Aztec calendar.
So MJ will talk to both Eric and Mark and we'll talk about that the next time. That concludes my agenda items.
Exactly. That concludes mine also. Anything else? Any other new business? Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
I do think you might want to call Eric on that one.